Yes, I think so.
Okay. Alright. So today, as you all know, it'll be an informal discussion. So, but if we could save the questions for the end, I'd appreciate it. Just so, once I get a flow going, I'd like to just take it to the end and not sort of disrupt the rhythm of the discussion. But by all means, if you have something on your mind, you can raise your hand. If you think you might forget it, then well, two heads are better than one. So you can ask your question then. I might not answer it then and there, but perhaps one of us remember it for after the discussion. But yeah, so I'd like to actually make this. Yes, the theme of the discussion will be Islam, mind and body, but it will be mainly an explanation of a particular hadith. The hadith is as follows. It's two words. Al-mu'minu nasheed, which means that the faithful person, faithful man or woman, is full of joy, is a joyful person. Right? So the Imam is actually defining the state of one's faith by the happiness, that effervescent energy that flows through a person. So there is clearly a connection between your mental, emotional, physical health and your faith. This is a clear connection. We have in numerous hadith references to the greatest ni'mah of the dunya being good health. So it is certainly something that shouldn't be sidetracked. I mean, if we are to embrace a spiritual path, there are many things that become incumbent upon us as we move further down that path. Things that are challenging our energy levels, things that require that we get less sleep, that we are more aware of ourselves, metacognition, that you're constantly vigilant over your thought processes. These methods that have been taught to us by our urafa, they all require sharp mental faculties, stable moods, consistent energy levels. Right? If your energy levels are spiking in the day, going up and down, well, your akhlaq's going to suffer. Right? And since the Prophet has said, I was appointed a prophet for this and nothing save this, innama denotes exclusivity of the object of the sentence. I have been appointed a prophet for this and nothing but this, save a noble man's character. So, my question is, how good can your akhlaq be? How friendly of a person, how joyful of a person joyous of a person can you be when your energy levels are going up, you're tired all the time, you're lethargic, you've got a malaise, you've got a cloud over your head, you don't get good sleep at night, you walk around with bags under your eyes, something's hurting, your kidneys are hurting you today, your liver's hurting you tomorrow, you've got an ulcer, every time you eat this you feel miserable for 2 hours. That's not the face of health. Right? The prophets, the Imams, they were known for having perfect constitutions. Right? The reason Imam Zaman is still alive and amongst us is because he has all the humors in his body are in perfect balance with one another. Meaning that he's not alive by some kind of exception to the rule. Right? That he follows the rules of his diet is perfect, his attitude is perfect, and so that is exactly what, human beings are capable of living thousands of years when they keep their constitutions in check. The only reason that we don't have our imams or our prophets living amongst us now is because they were assassinated in some form. They were either poisoned or slaughtered or some ill event befell them and they are no longer amongst us. But in the case of Imam Zaman, because he's in occultation, he's protected from these occurrences, and so he's still alive. So it's not some kind of exotic miracle that's keeping him alive. It's just when you have a person with a perfect attitude, a perfect diet, and keep as I said before, a person able to maintain their health physiologically and psychologically, then you have lengthy lifespans. And as we know, not only from the Quran, we know of Nuh, that he was amongst his people for 950 years, propagating, right? That doesn't denote the length of his life necessarily, that's just the amount of time he was with that particular group of people. Right? But if you look at the library of Nineveh and the 20,000 tablets that they discovered there, right? There are the clay tablets. They talk about the antediluvian culture, the culture that existed before the floods. Right? They mention in epics of Gilgamesh and what have you in different, numerous mention of those of them in the library that was discovered in Nineveh in the 1800s. And there are many mentions of people who had lifespans that were comprised of thousands of years. Right? It was only after Nuh, after the earth was repopulated, that we had people living 100 years maximum, 80 years, 90 years, and we have the lifespan that we have nowadays. Right? But prior to that, we have both from our own doctrines and from, it's a historical fact, it's been recorded in numerous different sources, that yes, human beings once enjoyed much longer lives than they do now. And it's not because they were blessed with some kind of exception to the rule, it's because they lived in the right way and they had the right attitude. So, achieving this state, achieving Iman, right, is in a way synonymous with achieving better health. If there are factors that we can control as human beings that will promote better akhlaq, that will help us become a perfect manifestation of the goal of the Prophet's prophethood, then surely they're worthy of our indulgence. If we know that taking care of our health will help us achieve a better akhlaq, will help us achieve energy levels that are more conducive to an improved attitude on our part, then, and will give us the capacity, the physical and mental capacities to serve our religion better and serve our own souls better, and I think it's our responsibility to make sure that if there's something holding us back from praying our night prayer, there's something holding us back from being in a good mood all the time and treating other people with respect because our mood is stable and we don't feel the need to stab at other people because we feel unhappy with ourselves, then if there are some physical factors that we can control, then I think we owe it to ourselves and our Lord that we should take care of those things. Meaning that it's a struggle as it is to find the motivation sometimes to make some extra sacrifices for the sake of moving ahead along our spiritual path. And if there are things that we can simply avoid eating, or things that we can change about our lifestyle that will allow us to achieve these spiritual goals, then surely they're worth talking about. So let's see if we can understand the body from the connection between the mind, the soul, and the body from the perspective of Islamic metaphysics, and see if that sheds any light on how to go about doing this. Right? Allah has given this body to us in good condition as a ni'mah, and one day we'll have to answer as to how we treated it. So if there's a guidebook to be found as to what should be done and what shouldn't be done, then let's see if we can find some useful information in the context of our system of metaphysics in Shiite Islam. So in order to start, the first thing that we should take note of is the fact that the best practical directives come from a sound theological worldview. Meaning that insofar as I have the correct set of facts in my possession, I can derive from that the correct ideology. Meaning that insofar as I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created me, He feeds me, He's the giver of my sustenance, I know that, I owe Him thanks. Right? So, what is real and what is not real about who created me and who feeds me leads me to understand what is right and not right about having gratitude or not having gratitude. You see the connection here? The theory, i.e. Allah feeds me, and the practice, therefore I should give thanks. Right? So, in order to build upon a correct, to develop correct objectives as to how we should treat our body and what is the right, what are the right prescriptions for sustaining our physical, mental health, we have to look at theory first and see what is it that we know about this body and our relationship with our soul, and see if there is a connection even worth talking about. Now, the first thing that prompted my migration from Canada to Qom was, in fact, nutrition. It was because I studied nutrition, and what I discovered while studying nutrition that sparked my curiosity and led me to actually go to Qom and see what there was to learn. I had no idea, as most people don't know, about what bounties there exist in the Islamic philosophy, in the realm of Islamic metaphysics, you mainly hear, most people in the West mainly hear about fiqh, usul, not even that much usul, a lot of history you get, a lot of like laws, a lot of do's and don'ts, right? Like you would do like this, not like that, and what have you, and obviously they have their place, but that's not what we were created for, right? Just to follow rules, which is the perspective I had when I was 17, 18. I thought, well, yeah, Islam, it's a rule, it's a collection of do's and don'ts. You make certain sacrifices, you do certain things you don't want to do, you don't do certain things you do want to do, and eventually, you get enough brownie points with God, and He'll put you in a nice place, gardens with virgins, right? So it turns out that there's actually a lot more to this, right, as you are all aware, but I wasn't aware when I was 17. When I studied nutrition, I started seeing that, this is actually a religion that ensures that not only will I eventually achieve the most promising sort of outcome in the hereafter, but my happiness in this world is also being guaranteed by this way of life. One of the first things that I noticed was that when I was studying about the nervous system and anatomy and physiology, I became familiar with this concept of certain nutrients passing the blood-brain barrier, getting into the region of the brain that's called the diencephalon, where you have the hypothalamus, you have the pituitary gland. These are the master regulators of your entire endocrine system. Your endocrine system governs your emotions, your energy levels, basically how good you feel. Whether you're in a good mood or a bad mood, whether you have energy, you don't have energy, and whether your body stays in, meaning to avoid cancer, you have to have a balanced endocrine system. I mean, you actually cannot name a physiological process that isn't in some way, directly or indirectly, connected to the 7 endocrine glands and their secretions. So I saw that, there are many neurotransmitters that, when a person's depressed, one of the standard protocols is put them on an SSRI, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Now, what's so instrumental about this? How can you deal with a mental, emotional state, right, depression, with a drug? Right? How is it that you can fiddle around with the chemicals in the brain and make somebody feel happier? Right? This struck me, because I wasn't aware of these processes at the time, and then when I started learning about, Parkinson's disease affected by your dopamine levels, schizophrenia affected by your dopamine levels, and I started seeing the connection. It's like there's certain chemicals floating around in the body, and it changes how you view reality, whether you're an aggressive person or not. Now, isn't aggression about the soul? Isn't it about the personality? Doesn't it have something to do with your character? How is it possible that by tweaking the chemicals in my bloodstream, I can actually I'm a different person for it? Right? I didn't think this was actually in the scope of a physiological effect to actually bring about mental, emotional changes. But one sees that the amount of neurotransmitters, fatty acids, and certain vitamins and minerals that pass the blood-brain barrier, if the body is successful at getting those nutrients into your brain, it makes all the difference. Your dopamine level, your serotonin levels, things are so interconnected in our body. If you change one thing, guaranteed you're going to change several, if not all the others. If you increase your serotonin levels, right, your endorphin levels are going to go up. If your endorphin levels go up, your GABA receptors are inhibited. If your GABA receptors are inhibited, your dopamine levels go up. Right, now what's affected by this? Just to give you a perspective on what we're talking about here. Dopamine is involved in the reward system. So you're in a good mood. Most of the pleasures that we as a society seek in our daily lives are about dopamine. When you drink coffee, caffeine inhibits adenosine, which itself inhibits dopamine. So when you drink caffeine, you release dopamine. Cigarettes release dopamine. Cocaine releases dopamine. Ecstasy, MDMA, it's a substrate for the phenethylamine receptor in the brain, which releases dopamine. Right? Crystal meth, all these drugs that people are crazy about. There isn't one drug, opiates or narcotics otherwise, that isn't somehow involved with the release of dopamine and serotonin and what have you. Right? So, what is it about these things that make them so attractive to us? Right? And why are they so instrumental in people's satisfaction in life, that when people have problems they resort to these things and it seems to be sufficient that they waste their money, their health, their wealth, they lose their families, their jobs over it, but there's something rewarding right, in the abuse of these substances, it keeps them happy and keeps them going back to their dealer, right? Is there a way to replicate those factors in our blood so we can enjoy those kind of effects without resorting to these kind of intoxicants? And what is the relationship between dopamine and our soul, right? Now, to give you a little window into the uses of dopamine, just so you know what kind of a broad spectrum of effects we're talking about here. Dopamine, if your dopamine levels are imbalanced, one of the symptoms of that is schizophrenia, right? You have 4 different pathways in your brain through which, the signaling pathways through which dopamine is expressed, right? You have a mesocortical pathway, a nigrostriatal pathway, mesolimbic pathway, and a nucleus accumbens pathway. Now, each one has its own effect. The mesocortical affects your personality, and the mesolimbic, for our discussion, affects the pleasure effect. It's the reward pathway. That rats, if they're given an opportunity to press 2 buttons, one releasing food, one stimulating the mesolimbic pathway, they'll keep hitting the mesolimbic pathway, they'll run out of juice, they'll pass out, wake up and hit it again. And then they'll pass out and they just keep going, and then they eventually starve to death and die. Right? That's how pleasurable it is. Even when they're given the chance, they hit the other one, they get some food, I don't want that, I want the dopamine. Right? That's what it's all about, right? It's all about the pleasure. And it just so happens that Allah has programmed us in such a way, the reward pathway is there to be released so that we are encouraged to perform certain behavior that is conducive to a better life for us. Right? And this is intimately connected with our fitrah. I'll get to that later. But basically with dopamine, we're talking about your creativity. Right? We're talking about your ability to express yourself effectively verbally. We're talking about your memory, your working memory, how many variables you're aware of in a given moment. When you're trying to make a decision, if there are 10 factors to be considered in making that decision correctly, right, insofar as Imam Ali alayhi salam has defined adl as al-adl yada'u al-umur mawadi'aha, justice puts everything in its right place. Now, in order to be an intelligent person, right, a hakim is one who applies adl to each and every aspect of his life. Meaning he puts everything in his life in the right place. And that is a true measure of intelligence. That is the definition of intelligence from the Islamic perspective. It is not a measure of your visuospatial skills. Those are skills that can in some way contribute to your intelligence, right? But intelligence itself, aql, right, is your capacity to put everything in the right perspective. So it's not a black and white definition here. We're talking about your IQ is 172, and so, well, you're an intelligent person. Because people with the highest IQs can oftentimes be the most impractical people. Well, the Prophet certainly would come pat that person on the back and say, you're very intelligent, you're practically incompetent, but you can work out, the new solutions for the nuclear energy crisis in the world. Congratulations, We wouldn't have prophets who are practically incompetent people, forget to put gas in the car before they try and drive away, right? But you ask them to perform, equations involving hundreds of numerals and they can figure it out immediately. That's not what Islam wants for us, right? So we have to be engaged in achieving that goal. And in order to put everything in its right perspective, you have to be aware of all the variables that have to be put in the right perspective, right? As I often mention when we're talking about this, that just having a conversation, how many variables are involved when socializing? If you look at these collections of ahadith that we have from, say Tabatabai and other renowned scholars, like Sunan al-Nabi, we're talking about the proper decorum of behavior in every situation that the Prophet used to exemplify. When he was having a conversation with someone, he always used to seat everybody in a circle. Right? Perfectly democratic system. Nobody at the head, nobody at the bottom, nobody feeling like, well, I'm not good enough, they put me at the end of the table, furthest away from the Prophet. No, everyone's equidistant from each other. Right? The Prophet always used to face both his shoulders to people when he spoke to them. Right? I mean, you wouldn't feel very good if the Prophet used to talk to you like this. You don't feel very special when someone's talking to you like that. Right? Or someone's constantly distracted. And distractions, believe me, you pour a glass of water in the room when you're giving a talk, everyone's looking at the glass of water. That's how quickly people are distracted. So, the Prophet, pour a glass of water and you see. I saw talking inside their heads. It's a very interesting phenomenon of it. Anyway, I have to teach you that the other way. It's not just you, brothers, everybody. Myself included. But the Prophet, every aspect of his behavior was perfectly coordinated to exhibit the best akhlaq possible. Right? And so all these variables that are involved, the placement of the shoulders, the focus of the eyes, how often did the Prophet used to look a person in the eye when he was talking to them? Did he used to, was he constantly looking at the ground, oh, I'm so shy, I'm such a humble person, or did he used to move up and down, He wasn't like insolently challenging them by staring them down, focusing on the pupils in their eyes. It was always a state of balance with the Prophet. It was always an easygoing balance, right? When people around the Prophet, they used to talk about the dunya, he used to talk about the dunya. When they spoke about the akhirah, he used to speak about the akhirah. Imam Ali used to joke frequently to make people feel more comfortable and at ease around him, because the awe and the magnanimity of his personality used to be very intimidating for many people, as you can imagine. So he would accommodate for that. So Imam Ali has compared justice to archery. Right? It's actually one of the sort of secrets behind this hadith, where the Prophet has encouraged people to teach your children archery, swimming, and horse riding. Each one producing a skill set in you which can be transferred to other parts of your life. Meaning the skill set that is developed by when you learn to swim can be transferred to staying afloat in the seas of the dunya. Right? The horse riding is about controlling not just the horse, but the animal within you. And likewise, archery is about applying justice to every situation. Just as there is a perfect center to every circle, there's a perfect way of applying justice to any given situation. And everything that is an aberration from that is an aberration from justice. There's only one way to perfectly do justice. So every situation has an objective value. That's what I'm trying to get across. Even your application of aesthetic things. Right? If you listen to music, if you indulge halal music, then be aware that yes, your individual tastes may be subjective, but there is objectivity in that subjectivity. Meaning that insofar as it is your responsibility to balance your humors, balance your emotions, there are some types of music that will help you balance, some types of music that will ruin the balance, will take you even further out of balance, like heavy metal and rap and what have you. These kind of things that affect your heart in an anapestic way. In other words, every situation that you consider, whether it's listening to music, or deliberating between two people, or doing your job correctly, or socializing, even a simple conversation with somebody else, there is the best way of doing it, and then there are different variations on how bad it gets after that, right? So yes, just as you have a bullseye, you can get closer to the center, you get further away, and likewise, you see different people who hit the nail on the head, and some people who are somewhere in between that and a terrible situation. In order to apply justice, so we know from the Quran where Allah has described a person who receives hikmah from Allah, he's been given khairan kathira, he's been given something great, a great, abundant bounty from Allah. So in order to achieve this state of justice in your behavior, right, you have to be in possession of the faculties which facilitate that behavior. If I don't have an efficient working memory, I'm not able to hold 10 variables in my mind at once in order to organize them in a favorable way so that I can apply justice to that situation. If I'm talking to you and I'm not aware of half the things that I need to be aware of in order to talk to you in a just and, enlightened way, then I'm at a loss. And I will suffer for that. There'll be part of my soul that remains undeveloped. And I'll be like a caricature when I emerge from my body and I'm actually, for the first time, able to gaze upon what I have made out of myself, my light body, as it emerges from my physical body. When I move into the astral realm upon death, I will see, I look like a caricature. Caricature, they have the big head, the small body.
Caricature.
Yeah. Pardon me, I went to American schools when I was young, so I may say vitamin instead of vitamin, tomato instead of tomato.
They always pronounce things in English.
Yeah, still incorrectly. Yeah. But the different the different features of a caricature are affected by, meaning your soul is affected by what parts of it you develop and what parts you neglect, right? So if you are putting all your energy into praying and fasting, what have you, and your akhlaq stinks, right? Well then there's a part of you that just isn't developed, right? When you move on to the hereafter, you'll be like that massive head with the small body, let's say, right? So if you want to look like the caricature when you pass on, well, you'll be at a loss for it, because you won't feel very attractive when you are able to see yourself. But if you want to develop all parts of yourself so you can be a true manifestation of Insan Kamil, then all all parts of you, all 7 identities, all 7 layers of consciousness have to be developed with it. Right? Would you consider the Prophet an insan kamil, right, if, let's say, he didn't mow his lawn well? He was incapable of figuring out how to mow his lawn properly. Right? I mean, it's not something like we assume is one of his talents. It's not something you think about. Right? But if the Prophet had a lawn to be mowed, he'd figure out the best way to do it. Right? Whatever he applies himself to, he will figure out the best, the most just application of variables in order to generate the most expedient outcome. So for this we need the working memory. Dopamine is very much involved with the development of the working memory. Meaning, if your dopamine levels are not sufficient, you are challenged with regards to being cognizant of all the factors involved in order to make that decision that the Imams have encouraged us to make.
Dopamine,
Dopamine.
not glutamate,
Not glutamine.
not
Glutamine.
5-hydroxytryptamine,
No, that's why I said
not
dopamine.
GABA.
I said dopamine because I mean dopamine. GABA inhibits dopamine, so when you inhibit GABA,
I know
you release dopamine.
Dopamine isn't closely associated with long or short-term memories, to my knowledge, but you may be right.
Hmm. Well, we can look at the sources afterwards and establish those facts. Sorry, you weren't here when we started. I asked that everyone ask their questions at the end to keep the flow and the rhythm going.
Yeah.
So, moving on, creativity, another aspect, right? One of Allah's attributes is Al-Khaliq, right? In order for us to be a manifestation of that attribute, we are in need of those neurotransmitters which will facilitate that. Right? So creativity is, again, one of the things which is greatly affected by dopamine levels. There's another... Sorry, can I ask for a glass of water? The mesocortical pathway, the dopamine, the mesocortical pathway, this is very much involved with the effective expression of your ideas. Right? There's a condition, alogia, when you have insufficient dopamine levels. This is oftentimes seen in schizophrenia. Schizophrenics are known for having insufficient dopamine in their mesocortical pathway, which are one of the symptoms of schizophrenia is that they tend to be very withdrawn from other people, incapable of expressing any kind of emotion or any kind of creativity in the expression of their ideas. Now this is a very important aspect of expressing yourself properly. You have to remember that in order to express yourself in a way that is reflective of in other words, the attributes of Allah that we've been instructed to manifest, right? We've been told, تَخَلَّقُوا بِأَخْلَاقِ اللَّهِ, right? In order to achieve the state of kamal within ourselves, we have to be manifesting the attributes of Allah. If we're not able to express ourselves in a way that is, meaning in a succinct way that communicates our point effectively, this is a defect in our aql, right? We have a hadith from the Prophet that says, إِذَا تَمَّ الْعَقْلُ نَقَصَ الْكَلَامِ, right? That as the intellect becomes more perfect, your speech becomes more succinct. You're able to communicate more with less. Right? Now this is very much involved again with the pathway that dopamine follows into the prefrontal lobe in the brain. When these levels are substandard, then you suffer an incapacity to express yourself effectively. Now, in overall, this was just a brief explanation of the effect that dopamine can have on your personality, but your energy levels, your memory, your concentration, one of the things that are implicated in attention deficit disorder, again, dopamine levels. Right? When your dopamine levels are insufficient, that's why you see there's Ritalin, these dopamine reuptake inhibitors, adrenaline reuptake inhibitors that are used to treat things like attention deficit disorder. One of the issues that's involved there is, again, working memory, that they lack the ability to be cognizant of the variables that are necessary for them to make the right decision. They are not focused in their thought patterns, right? And so dopamine is certainly implicated in that, because when we correct dopamine levels in a natural way, that attention deficit disorder is one of the things that's actually more easily treated by the correction thereof. So anyway, you're getting the idea that something as simple as a neurotransmitter in your body is greatly affected by, can greatly affect your personality and your success with regards to the kind of behavior that Islam wants from you. But now let's look at the theoretical aspects that we were talking about before to see if we can build upon a system of recognizing the relationship between the mind and the body, so that we can actually arrive at a system of interpreting our religion in a way that allows us to get the most out of the teachings that have been brought to us by our Prophet and our Imams. The first question we need to ask is, what distinguishes essentially a healthy person from an unhealthy person? A healthy body and a healthy mind is a body and a mind where everything is working in its proper way, where everything is being put in the right perspective. Meaning that where energy levels should be, where oxygen levels should be higher, we have higher oxygen levels. Where should the blood pH be? Should we have a 7.25, 7.35 or 7.45 level of alkalinity in the bloodstream? If we say, well, 7.35 and 7.45, that's conducive to higher oxygen levels. And oxygen is the antithesis to viruses, bacteria, parasites, cancer cells, and what have you. Well, then we see that as far as blood acidity versus blood alkalinity is concerned, putting it in the right perspective means keeping your blood more alkaline. So when you look at the body as a whole, everything that has anything to do with health is about putting everything in its right place. Meaning that everything that exists in the body, there are certain things that don't belong in certain parts, and there's certain things that need to behave in a certain way, whereas other things, meaning that there's certain things that can be increased, and certain things that can be decreased, and depending on which one you increase or decrease, you have different effects in the body. So it's about intelligence. It's about the body being a dynamic expression of a free-flowing system, so that everything is cooperating and everything is in its right proportions. Now, how do we achieve this? The second law of thermodynamics, according to Newton, states that everything is moving towards disorder. All physical bodies are in a state of decay, positively entropic. So everything's falling apart. Now, how do we justify the fact that the body is able to repair itself? How is it possible for the meeting of a sperm and an egg to generate a series of events which results in mitosis, cell replication, and where the cells are replicating, things are actually ending up where they're supposed to? What is the template that guides the development of the baby in the womb? Right? What is this force that suddenly brings about order, where everything we know about physics says that it should be moving towards disorder? Why is there an exception to the rule? When we develop laws of physics or metaphysics, we don't say, well, this such and such law exists except in this room over here. No, either we say everything is moving towards order, or everything is moving towards disorder. And if you say that some things are moving towards order when they should be moving towards disorder, there has to be a reason for it. There has to be another rule that overlaps that rule, and so we see something different. Right? So the first question we have to ask is, insofar as we are able to organize a body that is moving away from organization, we're able to achieve health. So what are the variables involved in that capacity? Where is that influence coming from? Where is the negative entropic influence coming from? If we look at the system of events that's taking place in the body, one of the things we'll notice is that using Kirlian photography, we've discovered that around the body actually exists an aura, right? What is oftentimes termed the etheric body. Now, this etheric body is connected to the physical body, right? But in order to understand the nature of the relationship, we have to look at some of the things that have been discovered in vibrational medicine over the last 50 years. So Kirlian photography, what happens there is we take an electrode, we take some organic material that was alive at some point, like a leaf or a tadpole, a frog, or what have you, and in between we put a special type of film. Now when you run a high voltage, high frequency, low amperage electric current into that electrode, the exchange of ions between the electrode and this organic material will generate an image on that film which will record the exchange. Right? You see how that's working? So here's a source of ions, here is something that will receive those ions, and insofar as there's an exchange, we have a film in between capturing that exchange. Kirlian photography does exactly that. It seeks to capture the image of that aura as it's being generated by this ionic exchange. So what they've discovered is when you take pictures of leaves that are cut in half, you get auras of whole leaves, right? Not half leaves. Which means that there exists something, there's something about that leaf that isn't destroyed when the physical leaf is destroyed, right? When you take Kirlian photographs of tadpoles, you don't see an aura of a tadpole, a bigger tadpole. You see an aura, of an adult frog or salamander or whatever creature the tadpole is from. Likewise, when you take a Kirlian photograph of a seed that is sprouting, you don't see an aura of a bigger sprouting seed. You see an aura of an adult plant, right? Which means that there is some kind of energetic template that is overseeing and guiding the development of that organism, whatever it may be. Whether it's an animal or a plant, there is an etheric body there, we'll term it the etheric body, that is the matrix, which is inviting those cells in order to organize in a particular fashion. Otherwise, you're leaving it somewhat of a random process. These cells are being generated, but yet the eye cells know to form an eye. Brain cells know to form a brain. Pancreas cells know to form a pancreas. How is this possible if there isn't something guiding it? You know, we can say, well, it's Allah who's doing this, but Allah uses mechanisms, He uses a method. Everything about Allah is organized, it follows a certain process. That Allah says in the Quran, وَلَا تَجِدُ فِي سُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَأْوِيلٍ. You won't see any changes in the way of Allah. Everything follows a specific pathway, and insofar as we are cognizant of that pathway, we can benefit from it. So if we understand these mechanisms, then we can understand how to make the most out of them. So let's look at at what point we are able to actually start influencing this system of events. If we have this energetic matrix that's organizing the body, and we are able to increase its capacity to organize the body, will that not in some way affect our health? Because what we're talking about is our body, our mind, our brain, all these different faculties that we have that are in some way tied in with the organization of our physical body, they require an organizing principle. And that organizing principle cannot be of a physical nature, it has to be of a metaphysical nature. Right? If you look into if you plug different variables into the Einstein-Lorentz transformation, you see that, in fact, things that move faster than the speed of light, the amount of energy that's necessary for a thing to sustain movement at velocities faster than the speed of light actually render that object a metaphysical object. It can no longer retain physical properties if it's moving faster than the speed of light. It just abandons those dimensions which we know as physical dimensions. Right? So what we have is an etheric body that is resonating at a speed faster than the speed of light. And hence, it abandons the properties that are moving towards disorder, right? And it embraces properties that are moving towards order. So a negative entropic influence rather than a positive entropic influence. Meaning that this worldview posits that insofar as your body has a healthy, coherent relationship with the metaphysical aspect of the self, is that body capable of being organized, and the cells of that body are accepting the invitation towards order and organization. And when there is some kind of incompatibility between the two, when there is a communication breakdown between the soul and the body, that's when things start falling apart. Right? So now we'll build upon this system, but the main contention we're saying here is that the development of your character, the development of your soul, is first and foremost necessary in order to maintain your physical health. Yes, you can feed your body correctly. Yes, it's important to provide all the nutrients, the cofactors, in order for your soul to actually have the raw materials to organize. If there are no bricks, then the building can't be built. It's as simple as that. If you don't have enough phenylalanine, you can't generate the tyrosine, which can't generate the L-dopa, which can't generate the dopamine, which can't generate the noradrenaline or the adrenaline. Everything being so connected in the body in this way, you have to have those building blocks to start off with. Right? So if you don't provide the building blocks, the soul can, it's ready and willing to be organizing your body in a way that is conducive to better health. But the nutrition is there, but the character building also has to be there. Because if there's a communication breakdown between the soul and the body, that invitation towards an organized state of affairs is no longer there. Right? So now, what are the different layers of that soul? What are we talking about when we say the etheric body? Is there something beyond the etheric body? In the Islamic system of metaphysics, there are different names given to different aspects of the soul. In Irfan, we use the terms Nasut, Malakut, Jabarut, Lahut, Hahut, and what have you. In philosophy, they're referred to as the Alam Madda, Alam Nifal, Alam Uqul, etc. And then Allatul Alal. And so, in English, in theosophy, in different theosophical texts, they use the terms etheric body, astral body, mental body, causal body. But basically, we're referring to the same sort of system here. It's like a Russian doll effect. Here we have a physical body, we have successive layers of subtle bodies which are organizing one another, right? And what you have is an etheric body, which is related to the nafs nabati in philosophy. It's the plant soul. The plant soul is responsible for very basic functions. We possess this soul in common with plants and animals. So the organization of the body, this negentropic function with regards to the physical body, that's where it comes from, that first layer, that first subtle layer. The removal of toxins from the system, assimilation of nutrients, the procreation, all these tendencies that we have, they are coming from the first layer of the subtle bodies. The second layer, the astral body, or the nafs haywani, is responsible for the generation of emotions from images. Meaning that the astral body has to do with stored light, and it has to do with the faculty of imagination. And all the emotions that you experience are generated from that faculty. Right? Meaning that you, insofar as you hold images, certain images in your mind, you're able to actually have emotions. So, yes, we talked about the etheric body and the organization of the etheric body. The structure amongst the etheric body can influence the structure of the physical body, but the etheric body itself relies on the structuring effect of the astral body. So if your emotions are out of harmony, then your etheric body will also be out of harmony, right? So the physical breakdown can be elicited by the emotional breakdown. Now, what about the emotional? Is that the highest self? Is that the highest faculty that we have? No. Beyond that, we have another layer. And this is the layer that we have in common with the jinn. And this is the highest level of consciousness that jinn are capable of. Right? This is known in theosophy as the mental body. Right? And basically what we're talking about here, this is the higher astral realm. It's the realm which takes these images, rearranges them in such a way so that you can generate new forms from perceived forms. So when we have, let's say, J.K. Rowling's coming up with these Harry Potter stories, you have certain beings which are proposed, let's say centaurs or fairies and what have you. These are not images that this person has perceived in the external reality. They've seen a horse, they've seen a human being, they put them together. How is it possible for a human to generate something from something else? We are only able to make these new images if we have a faculty that's capable, that is dynamic, that is flexible enough to rearrange existing images that are in our mind already. Right? And that is achieved from the mental body. Right? Jinn are capable of this, but that's as far as they go. Because beyond that, we have the faculty known as the intellect. The part of us in theosophy is referred to as the causal body. In Irfan, the Jabaruti self. In philosophy, the Uqul, the Aql. Right? Is that faculty of ours which is capable of perceiving abstract thoughts. right? Meaning concepts which are devoid of a space, which are devoid of time and space. We don't have forms. They are formless forms of consciousness that only embrace meaning, right? So if you consider things like, if I say humanity, draw me a picture of humanity. If you draw me a picture of a human being, that's a symbol of humanity, you can say, but it's not humanity. Humanity is a concept, it is a meaning that is defined only by consciousness, not by any particular image. And likewise with justice and courage and friendship, animosity, rudeness, politeness, right? These things are all concepts that we have in our mind. But it is our capacity to embrace those concepts that allows us to organize our behavior. And this faculty is what separates us and what earns us the right to the prostration of the jinns. This is the reason why Iblis was told to prostrate before mankind, before Adam. Right? The jinn looked down and said, well, I've made of fire, he's made of earth. Yes, you're looking at the physical realm, right? The physical realm itself doesn't hold all the answers. Meaning that if you look at the different frequencies of vibration, right? Now keeping in mind that in this world we have a currency of existence, we will refer to it as light. As Niels Bohr said, the Danish physicist, that all matter is just frozen light. What we're talking about here is vibration, is existence. And the different frequencies which comprise that vibration will dictate the nature of its existence. Right? When we had a conversation a few months ago about the periodic table, right? I made reference to the fact that every element on the periodic table is comprised of electrons and protons. There are no different types of electrons. There are electrons and there are protons. And we have different numbers of these electrons and protons, and from that we have all the different elements in the periodic table. You can't tell me that there's something in hydrogen that isn't in gold, except numbers of the same thing. Whatever's in hydrogen, it's the exact quality, same quality ingredient that's in gold, except a higher quantity of them. So meaning that what we're dealing with in the physical realm, everything that the physical realm is comprised of, is just protons and electrons, with differing amounts of them. Now let's look at the bigger picture now, looking beyond the physical realm. Start looking to the etheric body, the astral body, the mental body, the causal body, and see what is it that comprises them. It's all about light. It's all about, when Allah says, Allahu nuru samawati wal ard, right? This is something that embraces a literal meaning as well. Right? If you think of light as a frequency, when you slow this frequency down, you have the more mundane elements. Right? So if we start at the very bottom, right, we according to the ancient system of earth being followed by water, which is slightly more subtle than earth, slightly more subtle than water, we have fire, slightly more subtle than fire, we have air. Then we have sound, light, and then thought. Right? You see, if you follow these different frequencies up, you eventually arrive at that faculty of abstract thought. That is the highest frequency of organizational principles that you have available to you. Insofar as you embrace these concepts, right, and the concepts that Allah is feeding us with through the Quran and Hadith, insofar as you embrace them and use them to organize your personality and character, you are accessing the highest capacity of the self to organize every inferior capacity to it. So when the causal body is organized, the mental body will be organized. When the mental body is organized, the astral body, and likewise down to the etheric body and the physical body. So if you want the best health, seek the best character. Because when everything is in its right place, when everything in its right perspective, right, then you will have the better physical capacities because they have been organized by the best mental capacities. Right? It's going back to that concept of justice again, putting everything in its right place. Right? If serotonin is being secreted at levels that are appropriate for dopamine, you have a breakdown. You have a breakdown of a system. Right? If there is a lack of the precursors necessary to generate beta endorphins, Well, then the serotonin levels, which are supposed to increase secretions of endorphins, which will then inhibit GABA, which will then, through the inhibition of GABA, release dopamine. If you have just one of these amino acids, which is necessary to produce this particular substrate, right, then you have these other things, these other dominoes that are not going to fall down in this neural pathway. Right? So it's all about putting everything in its right place. The body will be able to do that if it's taught how to do that by your higher faculties. Right? So you see, if you have a disorganized mind, if your behavior doesn't lead you to put things in the right perspective, do things at the right time, talk in turn, to say things in the right way according to the prescription that Islam has given us, the further you move away from that, the further you're moving away from that bullseye. And the further you move away from that bullseye, the more disharmony will be created in the body. So it is very difficult, even with the right nutrition, even with regular bloodletting and regular sort of these practices which are there to maintain your physical capacities, even with all those, if you are not making progress in purifying yourself, these other systems will break down eventually. Because the body only knows how to organize itself insofar as it has access to these higher organizational principles. It's all about the negative entropy. When you remove the soul from the body, what happens to the body? In 2 days it rots. Why isn't it rotting right now? Obviously there's a difference, right? You know, there's something that's connected to my body right now, that if you disconnect that from my body, it will rot and my body will smell so bad, you will not be able to be in the same room as my body in 2 days from now. Right? That's how quickly positive entropy takes over. That's how quickly we fall apart. We are rotting flesh, save for the soul that's connected to it. Right? So are all souls the same? Is the one that puts things in the right perspective? Is the one that thinks according to the just, one who thinks logically the same as one who thinks illogically? Right? الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ كَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Right? Are we talking about the same kind of people, the same quality, the same caliber of human being? Those who have manners and those who don't have manners, are we talking about the same kind of human beings? Right? No, we're not. These are people who have embraced that order that the Prophet embraced. And they are a different caliber of person, and so they are a different caliber of physicality as well. Imam Ali alayhi salam talks about using perfume to what end? To cover the smell of your bad deeds. What has my body odor got to do with my bad deeds? If you are a person who's walking around with envy, right? You're a person who, rather than enjoying the bounties that another servant of Allah has been blessed with, you feel threatened and antagonized by them. Right? That is one of the expressions of the worst kinds of physical disharmony. Because remember, the worst sins are the ones that we commit insofar as we're human. Meaning, there are certain sins that only our human capacities, our human faculties can facilitate. Envy, an animal doesn't have the faculties necessary to envy another animal. And therefore we don't see envy amongst animals. Right? We don't see that sign. They respond to certain instincts. But for a human being to not benefit anything from another person's downfall, but still wish for that downfall, enjoy that downfall, right? That's a sickness of the soul. Only human beings are capable of it. Gossip, backbiting, slander. This is a specific human sin. Right? Schadenfreude. It is a German word, but it's used in English as well. When you enjoy someone else's misfortune in some way. This is something only human beings are capable of. Animals aren't that malicious, right? So, and these are the sins that are more detrimental to us, right? I'm making this point because a lot of us bring with us cultural biases which say that fornication, alcohol, drug abuse, these are the really heavy hitters, these are the terrible things, you know. Urinating while you're standing up, oh my God, like how quickly an Asian will have a bad opinion of you if they find out that you were urinating standing up. You know, these are physical, these are things that we share with animals. These are not insani sins, these are haywani sins. Right? Al-ghaybatu ashaddu min az-zina, right? To slander somebody is far greater, they say 70 times worse than fornication, than adultery. Right? So these sins that we commit because of our animal faculties are far, far less serious than the sins that we commit because of our human faculties. Right? But unfortunately, you see one of the most very common traits that you see amongst the ulama, the so-called ulama, is these sins that involve envy. Right? And these are the human sins, the slandering another person, something that's is commonly accepted amongst many Muslim communities, even though that these really are not the worst. It's not the worst you can do to like commit fornication. It's the worst you can do to slander someone and ruin somebody's reputation. But yet we don't think twice about it. But these are the heavy hitters. These are the ones that cause the breakdown. Because look at the hierarchy we've just been discussing. What aspect of you is performing the adultery or is consuming the alcohol? It's your animal level. It's a nafs haywani. It's your astral body. That's breaking down. But what if the causal body breaks down? Meaning those sins that you commit, insofar as you're a human being, those that are associated with your human faculties, those will cause a breakdown amongst all the inferior faculties. Right? So you see that it is imperative to maintain order at that level of the self. So those sins that you commit insofar as you're human, those are the ones you have to address first. We have a hadith from the Prophet Muhammad where he says, أربع خصال من كن فيه كمل إيمانه ولو كان من قرنه إلى قدمه ذنوب لم ينقصه ذلك. There are 4 traits that insofar as one possesses these traits, one's iman is kept perfect. Right? كمل إيمانه, which is different to tamma إيمانه. Like iman that is tamam is much less, has a much lower status than iman that is kamil. A kamil iman is iman that has gone beyond the call of duty, that has actually reached fruition in ways that requires a development beyond the natural development. Right? It's something that you have to make certain sacrifices to achieve. That is the kind of development that the Prophet Muhammad is associating with the human being, with the faith of the person who has achieved these 4 traits, such that وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ قَرْنِهِ إِلَىٰ قِدَمِهِ لَمْ يَنْقُصْهُ ذَلِكَ. It means that even if you are sinning, you are drowning in sins from your head to your toe, that faith will be unaffected, will not be in any way ruined by your sins. Meaning, insofar as those 4 traits exist. And what are those 4 traits? As-sidq, وَأَدَاءُ الْأَمَانَةِ وَالْحَيَاءُ وَحُسْنُ الْخُلْقِ. We're talking about honesty, trustworthiness, friendliness, and conscience. Or rather, conscience and friendliness. So, these 4 traits are so imperative, so crucial to the preservation of that causal body, to the part of you which is going to organize the rest of you, that if you don't have them, there's no guarantee that your faith will be protected. Right? That if you do sin, you are at risk of sabotaging those other aspects of you which are necessary in order to achieve this iman. But if you hold on to those 4, then if you were to commit other sins, the effect of them is far less, such that the perfection of your faith will be maintained. So what we're talking about, if you were to commit those haywani sins now, even though nobody is advocating that you do, the Prophet clearly isn't giving you the green light to go and commit them. But he's saying that if you slip, right, if you are unable to hold on to your taqwa with regards to these haywani sins, the preservation of the honesty and the trustworthiness, the conscience and the friendliness, those 4 traits will preserve the rest of what's important to you and what's essential to your faith. So, clearly we're talking about something that's taking place at the higher level of your soul, such that is affording the rest of your being organization. That organizational principle is going to exist in a strong capacity throughout the rest of your soul. Right? So you see what we're talking about here. What this hadith exemplifies is, in order to keep the soul healthy, right? And insofar as we have a healthy soul, we have a healthy mentality, we have healthy emotions, and we have a healthy body. Clink, and everybody goes over there. Insofar as you have the healthy soul, then all the other inferior faculties will be also kept in perfect health. And for that, it's all about akhlaq. It's all about the your observance of virtues and your abstinence from vices. Right? So you see, truly, the true psychiatrist is the one who advises you in matters of the soul, who encourages you to reimagine yourself in such a way that you are able to stay away from these kind of these vices which are creating this harmony between those different subtle bodies, which will cause a breakdown of your physical body. Now, as diseases come up in the body, this is a clear sign that there are some parts of our soul which are either lacking in organization themselves or incapable of exerting that organizational influence on the inferior bodies that are comprising our being. Are there any questions right now as to what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the relationship between the subtle bodies? Does everyone grasp like what I'm actually talking about here? Right? Even if there are many dimensions that we haven't discussed, because I'm really at a loss here. My intellect is far from perfect. I'm trying to condense everything so that we can actually fit it into a lecture that everyone has the appetite and patience for, right? But I'm skipping a lot of things, but the main point that I'm trying to get across here is that yes, there are many different aspects to it, and there are many things that can be said to build and sort of justify this perspective and this worldview. But ultimately, we're talking about different dimensions of a human being and how each one of them contributes to your health, right? If that organizational principle isn't there, we were talking about everything taking on a state of justice if everything is in the right place. Everything going in the right place relies on that organizational principle which does not come from the body. The body is completely dependent upon the metaphysical aspects of the self for that. And each self relies on the superior self. Right? So just to recap, the physical body relies on the plant soul, the etheric body, right? The part of us which is completely physical in nature, meaning it only is interested in maintaining the physical faculties. That relies on the emotional self, which relies on the creative imagination, the mental body, which relies on the intellect. So you see, if there's any breakdown here, we will have problems. So diseases then should be reimagined. Diseases shouldn't be seen as some kind of like burden that you've just been inflicted in order for you to test your patience in life, right? Rather, it's a sign that there are parts of yourself which are underdeveloped, parts of yourself which are lacking in access to the organizational principle. What is the organization? One of Allah's names is Al-Adl, right? Al-Haq. These are the insofar as you are capable. Because remember, when Allah was questioned about the superiority of Adam and his competence to become the Khalifatullah al-Ard, right? Allah's response involved the explanation or the reference to Adam being taught the Asma al-Husna. But we're not talking about rote repetition. We're not talking about Adam, repeat after me. Al-Adil, Al-Hakim, Al-Alim, right? It's about the awareness, that mode of awareness that is associated with each attribute of Allah. Insofar as you are capable of thinking like Al-Hakim, of thinking like Al-Salim, of thinking like Al-Shafi, the healer, insofar as you're capable of that consciousness which is associated with that type of behavior, which gives rise to that type of behavior, or appreciates that type of behavior, are you in possession of that name? Right? So there are 98 different rays of the spectrum that are involved. When you put those all together, you have the 99th name, Allah, which is everything in perfect proportions, but it is those 98 attributes and the mode of awareness associated with each one which qualifies you to be the representative of Allah on this planet. And insofar as you embrace those 98 attributes and put each one of them in the right perspective, will you have embraced the organizational principle? So, as an example, in philosophy refer to two types of intellect, right? Allama Tabatabai defines the aql nadari and the aql amali as follows. عقل نظري هو إدراك الحق والباطل في النظريات, right? Meaning Your theoretical intellect is the perception of truth and falsehood in theoretical matters, and the practical intellect, the aql amali, is idrakul khayr wal shar wal manafi' wal madar fil amaliyat, meaning it is a perception of good and evil, beneficial and harmful with regard to practical matters. So insofar as you are, so what are the ingredients of this? Right? Meaning, which attribute of Allah contributes to your perception of haqq and batil? Right? One of Allah's names is al-haqq. Insofar as you are able to recognize the presence of al-haqq in something, you are able to embrace theoretical truths, and theoretical meaning you're able to recognize whether something has truth in it or not. Insofar as you are aware of that attribute of Allah. Right? Now, with regards to good and bad, with regard to practical matters, al-adl allows you to recognize the existence of justice, right? And the application of all variables to their right perspectives, the rendering of all variables in their right place in order to generate the expedient outcome. That relies on your recognition and to what degree you've embraced this attribute of Allah, al-adl. Right? So you see, it's ingrained in your intellect, it's ingrained in your perception. Insofar as you have a healthy relationship with the attributes of Allah, can you even make effective decisions? Right? If you have a weak connection with al-adl, you won't be a very practical person. You'll be putting things in the wrong perspective. Right? And since we only have manifestations of Allah in this world, meaning we only have manifestations of the attributes of Allah in this world, there are no essentially evil things in this world. There are only essentially good things which are being put in evil places. Right? When it's a time to be quiet, right? If you are quiet when it's a time to speak, that is an evil. When you are speaking when it's a time to be quiet, that is an evil. Right? It's really what it's all about. And so you are not able to embrace a correct formula for living unless you have a healthy relationship with the attributes of Allah. And all of that requires that you put everything in the right perspective. Even the intellect itself. Right? Meaning that if you are not able to be aware of the things that you need to be aware of when you're making any given decision, whether you're figuring out whether this is a truth, whether it's a truth or it's a falsehood, whether it's beneficial or it's harmful, if you're not able to align the variables that Allah has blessed us with by means of our fitrah, if you're not able to access those, then you're not able to make the correct decisions. And you will put everything in its wrong place. Hence the organizational principle is absent. You see how things are tying in, everything is tying together? That we've been instructed for the salvation of our soul, you've been instructed to embrace the attributes of Allah in your personality and in your character. But when you embrace those attributes, it's essential that you know when and where to embrace those attributes. It's essential that you understand what the right place for each attribute is. Insofar as you do that, you are organizing those parts of the soul which are understanding those things. Right? That intellect of yours, which learns about matters, which organizes matters, right? Justice is the application of certain variables by the intellect to your life. Right? So improving character building relies on the application of justice to the causal body. So you see how that is a foundation of everything else inferior to it? You see the pattern? Have I left anybody in the dark with regards to this? Is there something specific that I can clear up before we move on?
Yeah, I'm just a bit confused on that.
About what?
Like, I was lost, and you said the 99 names. Once we understand that, then it develops our organisation. But I don't get that.
What I said was that insofar as we take the 98 attributes, when the 98 attributes are put in their right perspective, right? For instance, one of Allah's names is As-Sabur, right? The patient one. Now there are times to be patient, and there are times we're not supposed to be patient, right? Now if you are being patient when you're not supposed to be patient, and vice versa, then that attribute hasn't been put in the right place. And just because you say, well, it's an attribute of God, so it must be good, no. All we have available are the manifestation of attributes of Allah. Everything we do is a manifestation of one attribute or another. Whether we're killing somebody or we're helping somebody, it's an attribute of Allah.
So just to
But
clarify-
putting them in the right place, that is when everything is in the right place, then we're moving closer to the manifestation of Allah itself. Because Allah is the Ism Jami'. It's a conglomerate. It's embracing all the attributes in the right perspective, in the right place, and in the right time.
And in order to do that, we've got to use that akal.
That's
Yeah.
right. It's the intellect which organizes things.
And how do we get the akal sharp to do that?
Okay, well, that is its own class, but what I said to begin with was that we have to establish a theory before we can move on to the practical matters,
Okay.
right? So what we're trying to lay down here is to enrich your worldview so that you're understanding the relationship, that there even is a relationship here, right? Between character building and physical health. That's what I want to deal with right now. Does everyone understand that relationship? If you don't be shy, please tell me, because otherwise I'll just keep repeating myself. Right? I've done that enough already. So, okay. Over demonstrative, that's one of my flaws, I admit it.
Is this question and answer time now?
No. I just want to pause here before I move on to the next level. I want to make sure that there are no sort of, there are no grey patches in what's been
I
set
think
up
some of
until
the
now.
brothers would like to pray as well. So,
Okay.
are you...
I'm willing to do wudu. You carry on. I'll come back.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
So, once we understand this, then the next step is to see, well, what are the expedient ways to achieve this, right? So yes, what I was mentioning before was that it's an expression of the fitrah for us to have a healthy relationship with the attributes of Allah. One of those attributes is al-adl, meaning one of these attributes is very essential, very key to putting all the other attributes in perspective. That is the practical intellect, right? The practical intellect being a manifestation of the attribute of Allah, al-adl, right? The theoretical was the manifestation of the attribute of al-haq, right? So, what's now involved? Let me just touch on the fitrah. If we can understand the mechanism by which the fitrah can inspire us, this will help us understand what's actually going on here. Now, what I'm about to explain to you is a speculative thing. It's not something I can, because these are metaphysical matters. What we rely on with regards to metaphysical matters are metaphysical faculties. We don't understand the intricacies, the subtleties of the soul by sticking a thermometer in the right place, right? We don't use physical tools to measure metaphysical realities. So this isn't something I can give you, tell you, the weight and the height of it, and then we can just put it on a scale and be done with it, right? Those amongst you that are earth signs would probably like me to do that, keep everything very, measurable and in physical dimensions. But those of you who are fire and water signs and air signs rather, will understand the value of the more subtle thought processes. And so we have to now sort of put these things aside and look at this concept of taking lessons from observable reality and applying those principles to non-observable reality. Right? Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned hundreds of times in the Quran, I believe it's 488 times, He's mentioned different forms of the word ayah in the Quran. Right? Now, ayah meaning a sign. What is a sign, and what use do we have for a sign? Okay? Now, a sign is something that transfers your awareness from something that is present to something that is not present. Right? If I say, well, the lunar eclipse is a sign from Allah, what does that mean? I mean, I can see Allah in the sign, or the sign, the lunar eclipse is an indication of something that helps me understand Allah in a better way. Now, insofar as it is our responsibility to worship Allah, we have to know Allah. I, for one, refuse to worship something I don't know. Because what I'm worshipping could be a Hindu god with elephant trunks and multiple arms. If I don't know for a fact that this is a perfect being, and I can't wrap my head around it, I'm not going to worship it. And if the description that a religion gives me of this God, if it is something that my faculties, I can't judge things by using your faculties. I have to judge things using my faculties. If you say something is true, it's useless to me unless I can achieve some type of yaqeen with regards to it. So, something is only, my understanding of something is only useful if I'm able to recognize the truth in it. So, when we look at an ayah, we say, okay, what benefit can an ayah be to me? Is there some kind of a relationship between worship and the ayah? Well, we talk about the verses in the Quran as ayat, right? It is the ayat that you use in order to pray. Meaning, without reciting the ayat of the Quran, you cannot perform a correct prayer. Right? So now, prayer is an important part of worship. So this is a symbolic message to us, Allah is giving, that without using the ayat of Allah, you cannot worship me. Without embracing the ayat of Allah, you cannot basically do justice to the duty that is incumbent upon you with regards to worshipping me and submitting to me in this way. Right? So it is through the ayat that we are able to worship Allah, and Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, when he was asked about this matter of what is the explanation of this verse in the Quran where it says وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, right? Imam Sadiq alayhi salam said أي لِيَعْرِفُونَ, right? Meaning that to worship means to know. That insofar as you know Allah, you can worship Allah. And your knowledge of Allah is the limiting factor on your worship of Allah. Right? So if that isn't in place, then you can't worship. Now, I might just add that if you want to break for prayer, you can do so.
Yeah.
But I will, But let me just tell you about when the Prophet used to enter a masjid. When there were two groups of people, one group of people were having mubahitha, were having discussions, another group of people were praying. Which one do you think he chose? Right? Yeah. When we have a flow going, right? I'm not asking you to abandon your prayers from now on and forget Allah. Like this is a type of worship. Yes, we are encouraged to do our wajibat on time, but you're not abandoning Allah for a dunyawi act here, right? If you're delaying your prayer right now, it's so that inshallah you can enrich the next prayer that you pray, right? So this isn't the kind of situation. Remember the application of things like doing justice, putting everything in its right perspective, right? You can pray every day. I'll be gone tomorrow and go ahead and pray. But if you want to pray right now, it doesn't matter whether I'm here or not, then go and pray right now. I don't want to hold anyone back for it, and I don't want to be made to feel bad from keeping anyone from their prayer. So by all means, I don't want to keep anyone. But if you think that's more important right now than being present in this discussion, then by all means, wouldn't want to hold you back. Okay? But if you see value in the discussion and not breaking up the rhythm of it, then by all means, grace me with your presence and stay. So moving on. In order to worship effectively, we have to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah is encouraging us in the Quran to embrace these ayats, to recognize them. Now, one of these ayats that we can get from a relationship we discussed between the ayats in the Quran and how they comprise the prayer, and how you cannot have a prayer without the use of the ayats and embracing the ayats. So these signs are very necessary in recognizing and hence worshipping Allah. Let us look at this concept of sympathetic resonance and see whether this can shed some light on our understanding of the fitrah. Right? It is insofar as we have a fitrah that we are capable of worshipping. It is insofar that we have a fitrah that we are capable of knowing Allah and we are capable of gaining proximity to Allah. Right? So, if we can understand this fitrah, what we are understanding is the mechanism by which we achieve that which we were created to achieve. So it's a very essential thing. Now, just a question here. You will know that we've been created to worship Allah, hence we've been created to know Allah. And to know Allah, you're probably all familiar with this hadith that مَنْ عَرَفَ نَفْسَهُ فَقَدْ عَرَفَ رَبَّهُ. One who knows himself knows his Lord. Right? Now, can any of you explain? I'm sure you've been to countless speeches, you've been to countless lectures, and anyone explain to me what the fitrah is? Who has an idea? And those of you who've discussed the fitra with me, that's not what I'm asking. I know what my words repeated back to me. What do you know about the fitra from what other people have told you about it?
You know, I've heard it being called an Adamic blueprint, or whatever. How I understand it, what all men, all of us were created with. It's that it's that innate nature that would like. You've got tabia as far as I know, and fitra, and it's like it will take you. If you follow your fitra, you'll be in that realm of good action. I don't know if that's
okay. Yeah, I mean that's true. Yeah. Anybody else have any insights on the fitra and like what it inspires exactly?
The fitra is that part that Allah has put in us for us to learn, to remember, so that there's no excuse, and we always have that connection with Allah. That knows.
What does it inspire in us, essentially? To move us towards goodness, there has to be a mechanism involved there, right? Because if you just tell the soul good, right, it doesn't really mean anything to the soul, right? Can anyone define good for me right now? Tell me what good means.
Harmony.
Harmony? Harmony with what?
Appropriate.
You're on the right track, but a specific, like in a sentence form, if you could define it for me. What is good? We all use the word 10 times a day, but...
Right thing in the right place.
Huh? Put everything in the right place.
Yeah, right thing in the right place.
In a way, yes.
Good
Meaning?
balance.
A balance, yeah. Now, you pretty much hit the nail on the head, yeah. It's... good is what we refer to when we're describing something that takes us closer to something that we have in mind. We have a particular objective. If something moves us towards that objective, then we say it's good. And so I say this is a good friend, and this is a bad friend. This friend gives me what I want from a friendship, I say he's a good friend, and if this one doesn't, then I say he's a bad friend. If I say that's a good car or a bad car, meaning what I want from a car, that car gives it to me. So I have something in mind, I have a certain set of values in mind, that car facilitates it, I say it's a good car. And everything's qualified in accordance with that, see. So now, if I say, well, the fitra is inspiring something good in me, goodness in me, we have to qualify that goodness with something. Because good for Adolf Hitler meant something very different to what it means for me. So what's good? Did Adolf Hitler not have a fitra that he went towards something else? Or what's happening here? What is the fitra? Has nobody ever defined the fitra for you before? Apart from this this inclination towards goodness.
Is it towards Allah's attributes?
Towards Allah's attributes, yeah, now you're getting closer, yeah. You see, I'd just like to emphasize here, sometimes you only see the value of something when you see what's missing, right? The fitra, as I was saying, it is the mechanism by which you move closer to Allah. Everything that you do, when you say your prayers, you say, قُرْبَةً إِلَى اللَّهِ, like you're performing your prayers in order to gain proximity to Allah, right? And so your responsibility then is to embrace those types of behavior which expedite that movement towards Allah, right? And that's what I was saying, like, can you move closer towards Allah when you are, let's say, learning something, or can you move closer to Allah when you are praying? Right? Which is it? Which exercises the greater faculty in you? And then you'll know which one to spend more time on. Right? The intelligent person uses the superhighway. Right? Imam Ali says, ليس العاقل من يعرف الخير من الشر ولكن العاقل من يعرف خير الشرين. The intelligent person isn't the one who knows the difference between good and evil. He's the one who knows the lesser of the two evils. Right? So there's a situation, like what we were talking about the prayer before. Do we break up the rhythm of the discussion, or do we go and pray? What's the lesser of the two evils? Right? Your prayer is there. Right? You prayed yesterday, you'll pray tomorrow, inshallah, you'll pray an hour from now. But if there's an opportunity, I'm not just talking about this, the context of right now and who went to pray and who stayed here and patting different people on the back. That's not what I'm trying to say. But I'm trying to say that the intelligent decision involves the one that gets you to that objective closer, and it is the fitra that is a mechanism of that. Right? It is the fitra that facilitates that gaining proximity to Allah. So, if we, insofar as we understand that, we will know that, oh well, this is the engine that drives me towards Allah. So I have to know how to grease it. The person who wants to treat his car right, he gets to know his engine, right? And if you don't understand this engine, then well, something's missing. Something's missing from the method that is being employed in order to educate the masses, right? These concepts that are very valuable to giving people an understanding and a recognition of their faculties and the faculties that can be used in order to gain, to improve upon one's relationship with Allah, these things are lacking, right? If the very engine which facilitates your spiritual growth is something that's a big question mark for you, well then something needs to be changed, right? So this is something I very much encourage you to go and teach others about. Something you pay very careful attention to it here, so that you can contemplate it later, right? تفكروا عند الله. Sorry, تفكروا ساعة أفضل عند الله من عبادة 70 سنة, right? The contemplation and understanding of an hour is greater than 70 years of worship, right? So it's really about putting things in the right perspective. Do you spend that hour meditating? Or do you spend that hour praying? These are the different ranks of people in the words of the Prophet. And so when you take something out, when you are present in a discussion, the first thing you have to do really is take those things, integrate them into your understanding, right? Because insofar as you integrate things, they are useful to you, right? And this is something Imam Ali alayhi salam states explicitly. He says, "Al-ilmu ilman, il-masmu' wal-il-matbu', wa la yanfa'u al-masmu' idha lam yakun al-matbu'." The two types of knowledge, there's the acquired knowledge, and there is the intrinsic knowledge, right? The integrative knowledge. And there are no benefits to the acquired knowledge when there is an absence of the integrative and the inherent knowledge. Meaning that there is a part of you that takes things that you are learning and it puts them all together, pieces them all together. It creates a worldview. Right? It creates a perspective on reality, so that every phenomenon that appears in front of you, you have a way of making head and tails of it. You have a way of sort of interpreting it that will benefit your spiritual path. And insofar as you are equipped with that, you are able to make intelligent decisions. And acquired knowledge, right? If I, for instance, give you a hadith, I translate a certain hadith for you, as an example. ما من رجل تكبر أو تجبر إلا لذلة وجدها في نفسه. No human being is arrogant or is oppressive or arrogant to another human being, save because of the baseness that he sees in his own self, right? So insofar as I have an inferiority complex, will I have a superiority complex? I will only speak rudely and insolently to you, right? There will only be flaws in my manners insofar as I have insecurities in my own self. Insofar as I see baseness and inferiority in my own self, then I will compensate for that inferiority by treating somebody else badly. There is, according to the Imam, there's no other motivation for it. مَا مِنْ رَجُلٍ تَكَبَّرَ. There is no human being that does these things, takabbar or tajabbar, arrogance or oppression, save it's only because of that inferiority that he sees in his own self. So what does that mean for us then? Right? We translate it into this perspective, and we import it, we make use of it by doing what? By plugging it into our soul. The next time we find ourselves being insolent to somebody else, that's now a part of us, that hadith. We've contemplated, we've reflected, we've plugged it into ourselves. The only way you can walk your life, the path that has been chosen for you in this world, the only way you can sort of fit into that rhythm, you can sync yourself with that rhythm, is if you are plugging everything you learn into your life as you learn it, right? So meaning that if I find there's one or two people in my life that I tend to be rather insolent to, right? I have a certain habit when I'm in a certain mood. I seem to think it's okay if I talk in a very disrespectful way to certain people, right? Now, you remember the hadith we were talking about honesty and trustworthiness and what have you, and how if you have these four traits, then You can commit the other sins and they won't damage your, no one's advocating it, but like drinking alcohol won't ruin your faith because you have these four. These are the four pillars that are protecting your faith in some way. If you slip, commit these sins, right, in order to guarantee that those sins won't throw you off completely, you have to hang on to these four. The honesty, the trustworthiness, the conscience, and the friendliness. If you start behaving unfriendly with people, you start behaving disrespectfully, you've already abandoned that pillar, and already you've got leaks in your faith. Now that honesty we're talking about plays an important role in your integrity. You see, your integrity is your capacity to be honest with yourself. So if you are able to look at yourself and say, okay, well, I'm not exemplifying a certain attribute which I know is indicative of something else. So in order to be honest with myself, I have to say, well, yeah, I am being rude with certain people in my life. I'm being rude with my wife. I'm being rude with, a certain friend of mine that, like, in our group, he tends to be less respected than other people. So I like to poke fun at him, and I do so in a malicious way sometimes. At least be honest with yourself. You don't have to go advertising to anybody else, but at least you have to have some integrity and admit to yourself that, yes, I have this flaw. And the consequence then is that you recognize I have this flaw because of the baseness that I see in my own self. That's the first step, is just accepting, is bringing every hadith full circle to yourself. When you plug it into yourself, then the ilm matbu is developed. When the ilm matbu is developed, then the ilm masmu' can actually have some meaning in your life. The acquired knowledge that you're gaining can actually have some meaning in your life. These things actually apply to your life now because they are the worldview through which you see. They are the lenses through which you look, and you perceive everything, you interpret everything according to these criteria that you have taken from the hadith and from the Quran. So that becomes your litmus paper to measure everything against. Now it's the integrated knowledge that Imam Ali is referring to. You can learn, you can memorize what you like, but if you don't integrate it, it's useless to you. As this develops, you have the development of the intellect, and you have the development of the capacity to put everything into right perspective, right? Because we have a hadith from Imam Musa Kazim alayhi salam, where he says, "Al-aqlu gharizatun tazidu bil-ilm wa-tajarib." Right? The intellect is an instinct which increases by means of knowledge and experience. Right? So, intellect is, it's not a, when you're faced with a decision, very rarely do any of us actually start this logical setup of the logical syllogism. A equals B, B equals C, hence A equals C. We don't go through that process. Aristotelian logic is well and good for developing formulas for measuring certain philosophical hypotheses against, but when it's actually our life and we're making decisions in real time, we don't resort to these logical precepts and values, right? We make decisions instinctually. And what facilitates good instincts as opposed to bad instincts? Right? It's the development of your instinct. And you cannot develop your intellect unless you're being honest with yourself at every step of the way. Right? It's very interesting, if you read up on people who've had near-death experiences, two of the values that unanimously they put above everything else when they return from this near-death experience, those two values are love and knowledge. Everything else loses its value in their eyes. They don't care about their money anymore, what job they're working is unimportant. People have terrible tempers, it all dissipates when they return from these near-death experiences. Right? Now doctors will say, no, look, there's this pinolene is being secreted, or there's like a lack of oxygen to this cerebral hemisphere, and I just laugh at people like that, because it's like saying, that to me is like saying, well, when I get angry, my blood pressure goes up, my temple veins inflate, adrenaline is released, my body temperature goes up. Okay, yes, these are the physical correlates of anger, a condition of the soul expressing itself through the body. But if you were to tell me that these are it's these things that are causing the anger, I'll laugh at you. Anyone will laugh at you. That means every time I go to the sauna, I'm going to get furious, because my body temperature is going up, adrenaline's going to be released, let's say. Right? You're replicating the conditions of anger, the physical conditions of anger, without producing the anger. Right? Doctors love to just point at the physical body every time. And that's like a child in a womb saying there's no such thing as mum, right? Whatever you see, it's in this womb right here. There's no such thing as light and music, and like we have to measure everything according to the parameters that we're familiar with right here and now, right? And then, well, when you emerge from the womb, all of a sudden you see, well, there's a lot more than was in that womb, right? And if Allah is only capable of creating phenomena that can be measured with physical tools right here in this physical world, well, then I would challenge that God, and I would question whether that is actually a God that's worth worshipping. So obviously there are phenomena that we are that are worthy of embracing, that have to be measured with criteria that supersede the physical alone. Right? So to look to me that experience, you have to go beyond these very weak and childish medical explanations of things, because it's quite, as they say, MD stands for medical deity. It's a superiority complex that doctors have, because they're actually not able to cure many diseases. Anyway, put that aside. So when we want to actually start moving towards a greater capacity to organize these attributes in the soul, we have to be developing that instinct, which the Imam Musa Kazim is referring to as the instinct of aql. And we have to have the correct employment of knowledge and experience in order to facilitate that. So you see now how we're coming full circle. We're talking about knowledge and experience being processed in a certain way to enhance the function of the intellect, which functions as an instinct, which when we have achieved the correct functioning of this instinct, we have the correct application of attributes of Allah, which is synonymous with the embracing of a higher organizational principle of the highest part of ourself, which is the intellect, the causal body, which is going to influence every faculty inferior to it, resulting in a more organized physical body. Right? So you see how knowledge, the correct use of knowledge and experience can result in better energy levels. How the correct embracing of knowledge and experience can result in, let's say, greater oxygen flow to the brain, right? Which will result in improved memory, as we see in the case of double-blind studies that have been done on ginkgo biloba, which essentially increases oxygen flow to the brain, and we see a rapid cessation of Alzheimer symptoms and other diseases which challenge one's short-term and long-term memory. Right? So this is a cycle, and everything is connected. We see an intelligent design at play. There are cases where people who have had marital problems, will develop a rash around their wedding ring. Right? Now what's that all about? And why is it that as their marriage problems are solved, why is it that rash around the wedding ring goes away? Because they coincidentally had some allergy to silver or gold, and that just came about as the marital problems came about, and suddenly they were cured of those sensitivities as their marital problems were solved. Right? Is there no connection between the mind and body? When Allah created the mind and body, He said, you know what? Can't figure out actually a very good way to do this, so I'll just make this mind and body and have absolutely nothing to do with each other. I don't need to integrate them. I'm God. I can do what I like. If to deny the connection between mind and body is actually to question the intelligence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because, now I'm just a human being, but if I was to plan this system, I would make it so that as a person fails to correct sicknesses of their soul, I would make it so that the body would develop certain sicknesses in order to bring the person's attention to the problems that exist in the higher parts of themselves. If you're too complacent to recognize that you're an impatient, selfish, arrogant, self-indulgent SOB, then you deserve to get this disease to wake you up. You're not aware. There's no alarm clock going off in your head that says, you need to correct your behavior, you need to improve your akhlaq. Well then, I'll give you an ulcer. Right? I'll give you pancreatic cancer. And you say, oh wow, you gave me this disease, etc., etc. Some people say, oh, I don't believe in God because I have so many problems in my life. Well, is that the highest, when we're talking about intelligent decisions now, is that the highest value that we can embrace? Just a body that functions well from the time you're born to the time you die? Is that what we're all about? Is that what this life is all about? It's all about the development of the self, achieving the highest status in the hereafter. And you can only do that by ennobling your character. Because by God, the Prophet wouldn't have come if we didn't have the capacity to ennoble our characters. And he said so himself. He didn't say, I've come to ennoble your characters. He says, I've only come to ennoble your characters. If you pray, your prayer is worth something insofar as it contributes to the ennoblement of your character. Right? If your akhlaq is imperfect, well then, if a human being like me can have the foresight to create a system, I don't know how to create that system, but I know that it would work, it would be a very intelligent system. If I could create a sort of a connection between the soul, the mind, and the body such that problems of the soul will show up in the body. They're tangible, you can actually put your finger on them and go, well, you know, I needed this kind of a wake-up call in order to recognize the problem. Now I see it. Do you see how this system is a perfect design? That you develop physical problems because you have failed to address your spiritual problems. Right? And it's that organizational principle. You fail to organize. There's a part of you that wants more as-sabur, wants more patience. As-sabr ra'sul iman. It's the head. Patience is the head of your faith. If you lack patience, your faith cannot develop. If you lose your temper every time something challenges your access to those things that you value for whatever, for your self-indulgent, pleasure-seeking purposes. If you are deprived access to those things, and you lose your temper, you think you have a right to throw a shouting, you know, I didn't get my food when I wanted it. My blood sugar dropped, that gives me the right to raise my voice, scare my children, shake the whole house up, put my wife in a bad mood, send everybody to bed miserable. Why? Because my blood sugar levels dropped. I have the right to do that. Why should I control my temper? God's going to send you a wake-up call. He's going to give you pancreatic cancer. He's going to give you diabetes. Right? These are all issues that will come up. Each organ stores different emotions. We have the lungs with grief. We have fear in the kidneys. We have anger in the liver. You will notice, people who have liver problems, they will develop these two lines here. You can quickly notice someone who has a liver problem, and also you can quickly know the person, you just as quickly know this person who has repressed anger. When you are angry, what happens? You frown and these two lines appear, right? The liver will manifest the same lines that appear when you frown, meaning that the same organ that generates those two lines is the one that's taking the anger, meaning the emotion which generates those two lines when you're upset. If you have a relaxed face and you have those two lines, it's an indication that your liver needs working on. Right? Gallbladder holds rage, right? Etc., etc. Like your emotional state is going to directly affect and there is a certain poetry about that. You see, because one of the main messages in the Quran is Allah wants us to live by perceiving things like poets would perceive them. God doesn't want us to live like scientists. Scientists look at things in a very reductionist way. It's an imperative for them. In order to analyze things, break them down into their constituent parts, in order to piece them together and understand how each individual phytochemical is going to bring about a different reaction in the body, etc., etc. If you're not able to have that reductionist perspective, at least for a moment, you won't be able to actually analyze things into their constituent parts and see the value of each one. But that has its place. But that's not how God wants us to live, right? Use that in order to shed some light on something. But as far as putting everything in its right perspective, just because it works over there doesn't mean it works over here. Meaning, that's not a philosophy for living. A reductionist system is not the holistic system is a philosophy for living. Take your messages from nature. How does nature work? Does nature work as isolated parts? Right? Or does it work as an integrated whole? We have ecosystems which function, everything fitting together in such a perfect way. Ecosystems that if you remove any one creature from it, you have a problem. I oftentimes cite this example, which I think illustrates the point very wonderfully. If you look at the relationship between sea otters, sea urchins, and kelp, if human beings, we now harvest kelp in order to make supplements. They're very rich in certain minerals. If we over-harvest kelp, we deprive sea otters of their mode of camouflage. Sea otters hide amongst the kelp to hide from the sharks. Sea urchins, you're right, sea urchins eat kelp. Now what happens if these sea otters are no longer able to hide from the sharks, they either get eaten off or they run away. They go inhabit some other part of the sea. Now, without those sea otters, the sea urchins overpopulate the place. There's no limiting factor on their reproduction. There's nothing to eat them up anymore, right? So they end up overpopulating, they end up further reducing the amount of kelp that's available, right? So you see what happens is, no kelp, not enough kelp, not enough sea otters. Not enough sea otters, too many sea urchins. Too many sea urchins, no more kelp, no more kelp, no more sea urchins. Who's left? There's no sea otters, no sea urchins, no kelp. Everything fits together perfectly, right? So nothing's left down to random, nothing's left down to chance and well, what could have been and what should have been. Allah has organized everything to play its role perfectly, right? And so if you look at the messages implicit in nature, you see this is a sign. Allah is saying that the systems that function the best in this world, take a lesson from them. The integrated wholes, they are the ones that function the best. When everything plays its part, when everything's put in its right place, when everything knows what to do, how much to do it. Right? And if everything functions naturally, everything will function according to that system. It's when humans get greedy and we throw things out of balance, but that's a different story. Nonetheless, what you see here is a perspective on living. The holistic way of living is the way that integrates all the different truths that are necessary in order for you to live the best life for you, in order to embrace the highest truth, to embrace the highest good that you have available to you in this very short lifespan. So I'll bring this all to an end. I don't want to exhaust you too much, and so I never get invited back. Nonetheless, the point that I want to get across to you is that take it upon yourself to study different aspects of nature. Use science to take lessons from, but use it to piece together a worldview so that you are developing this ilm matbu, the integrated intellect, the knowledge that puts everything together, the holistic knowledge. You see, the acquired knowledge, that's the reductionist knowledge, the knowledge of individual variables. What's the capital of Indonesia? Jakarta. What good is that to you, that information? Absolutely nothing. Unless you can integrate it into a system that improves your mode of awareness so that you're perceiving things in a way that facilitates a better decision every day of your life. The better decision means you are better able to organize the rest, every single part of you. Because it's all about translating the organizational principle at the very top all the way down to the bottom. Now, the very last thing that I'd like to say to you is that there's one thing that's very easy for you to adjust, right? And that is your diet. It's something that you can physically maneuver. Either put it in your mouth or not put it in your mouth. If I say, control your temper, a bit more of a challenge than to eat a salad or not to eat a salad, right? Now, there are just some things I would like to bring to your awareness, just some tips that can significantly affect your health and significantly affect the balance of minerals in your body so that you can get a head start on what we're talking about here. Because again, if you don't provide your body with the raw materials, the organizational principle is there, but there's nothing to organize. You just don't have enough magnesium in your body to relax your muscles at night. End of story. Right? Your body doesn't synthesize magnesium, it needs to get it from its diet. Of course, you can increase the efficacy of your system, increase the sort of, the efficacy, meaning that you can get more out of less. We do so through fasting, and we make it a more efficient system by doing so. We can get the most out of that small amount of magnesium we take in. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not saying we can't alter our metabolism. But ultimately, we call the essential amino acids essential because we don't manufacture them. Right? We call the essential fatty acids essential because you don't manufacture them either. Vitamins, minerals, same thing. So ultimately, what we want to do is look at the spectrum of minerals that our body needs on a regular basis and see, is there a way to get them in our diet in such a way that we can make it a simpler process to get those neurotransmitters into our bloodstream. Because what we're talking about here is the interfacing between the mind and the body. This mechanism of the fitra. You see, the fitra, what happens is, this concept of sympathetic resonance is one of the lessons that we can take from, it's one of these signs that I was talking about. Sympathetic resonance dictates that when two things are resonating at the same frequency, one movement can elicit another movement without physically coming into contact with the other thing. Right? It's like when a truck drives by and it shakes the metal paneling in your radiators or something like that. Right? That vibration, without touching it, is eliciting this other vibration in something else. Right? Now, if you look at vibration, you look at the principles involved, that's what we're talking about really when we say that your fitra is all about the attributes of Allah, as the brother indicated. The fitra, ultimately, the mechanism by which it works is by invigorating a response inside your soul, right, which allows you to appreciate the manifestation of certain attributes. If I look at somebody and I see that they are behaving in a way that exhibits an honest nature, a generous nature, or what have you, this creates pleasure in my soul. It creates a sense of, it's a harmonious form that I'm perceiving. Why? Because that is a manifestation of one of Allah's attributes. Why am I not impartial to that attribute? Because there is a mechanism at play. You see, the origin of all energy, the origin of everything in this universe is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The essence of Allah is the source of every pleasure or displeasure that has ever come into existence. And it is insofar as we are aligned to the nature of that source that we experience pleasure or displeasure in our lives. Meaning dopamine. You see dopamine being released when you smell food and you're hungry. Dopamine is released. When you want something, you buy that thing, and when you buy something new that fits your needs, it's like compatible with a certain objective, a certain necessity of yours, your body releases dopamine. When you notice something new suddenly pop up, dopamine is released, right? Dopamine is really, and also this what we're talking about, memory and this reward. Why it's involved with the reward pathways, because when you perform certain behavior that is in some way conducive to achieving an end which is important for your soul to achieve, dopamine allows for that positive association to be made. That's why we call it the reward pathway, because it is giving you a sense of pleasure that rewards you for this behavior so that you will indulge that behavior in the future. That's why it is very important in memory, because without that, you actually don't make associations that are actually useful as memories. So, what are we actually talking about with regards to, if I say that perceiving something gives me pleasure, what's actually going on here? If I have an image in my mind of somebody helping somebody in need, I say, well, that's a manifestation of Allahul Kareem or Allahul Sakhi or what have you, one of these attributes which denote generosity. Now, why is it that will generate pleasure in me? There's got to be a mechanism at play. It's not a random thing. Attributes of Allah, perceiving them makes me feel good. Why is that happening? You see, Allah, if you think of sympathetic resonance, you think about the two people holding the guitars, right, and the perfectly tuned guitar strings, and one person strumming the A string, the other person not touching any of the guitar strings, and yet the A string is vibrating. Why? Because the sound waves that are being generated by my guitar are eliciting a vibration in the strings on your guitar, by merit of the sympathetic resonance that exists between them. Now, what if I had a guitar string in my soul for every attribute of Allah? Right? Now, is Allah not the ever-resonating source of all existence? Is He not the source of all energy in this world? Is He not the source of all the attributes that have been manifested in various forms in this world? Is He not the source of that light that has passed through the prism of the malakut to manifest in the seven rays of the spectrum in the nasut, so that we can differentiate between the attributes of Allah and actually appreciate them? Whereas they're encapsulated in a single spectrum of light, a single beam of light, at the level of the Jabarut, indistinguishable from one another. Allah has given us the benefit of the Nasut so that we can actually see all the colors in the spectrum which comprise His essence. But is He not the source of all of those? Is He not the source of that light? Does He not introduce Himself as Allahu Nur as-Samawat? Right? He is the source of that light, and so insofar as we are able to recognize different attributes, are we able to tune into the origin of those attributes, and hence we become the guitar strings which are resonating sympathetically with those frequencies that are present in the essence of Allah. If they exist here, we know they came from somewhere. And we know that there's nowhere that anything has ever come into existence save that it takes its point of origin in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So everything has to start there. So do you see this mechanism that's at play? Right? When you are imagining something that gives you pleasure, it's because of the presence of the attributes of Allah in that image. Right? So that is actually what's invigorating this response. That is actually what's facilitating this pleasure. Right? So now, why is it that these connections can actually be made? We're talking about something physical here. We're talking about this metaphysical origin. I'll let you do your own research on this matter, but I will just point you in the right direction. If you study the chakra system, pictures of the chakra system have actually been taken. There's a special device called the AMI, the Apparatus for Meridian Identification. It was developed by a man by the name of Hiroshi Motoyama, and he developed it originally to track the authenticity of the meridian system that has been proposed in acupuncture. He wanted to see if there's actually any substance to it. And he actually found that when he used this infrared spectrum of light to monitor fluctuations in different frequencies of energy on the skin of the body, he saw that these acupoints actually correspond with the map of the acupuncture points that we have inherited from traditional Chinese medicine. So this is a reality. How did they know about these things? Were they randomly putting pins and eliciting reactions? Obviously, our forefathers had modes of perception that were, exclusive to a certain lifestyle that wasn't made weak and didn't atrophy on account of all these blessings that we now have. We call them blessings, but modes of technology. But that's a different story, whether these things are really a benefit. And this hadith that says, إِذَا عَقَلَ النَّاسِ خَرَبَتْ لَخَرَبَتِ الدُّنْيَا. If human beings were to reach the pinnacle of their intellect, the physical world would fall apart. Right? There's a lot of meaning in that. We'll leave that for another time. But the point I was trying to make was that, what was the point I was trying to make? I went up. Could I actually have some more water? Thanks. So these acupoints that were monitored, that were mapped by this apparatus for meridian identification, they were also able to actually pinpoint the location of the 7 chakras. Right? Now, as it turns out, what this perspective taught by vibrational medicine dictates is that these 7 chakras are the points of interface between the astral body and the physical body. The etheric body and the physical body. What we were talking about before, this is the actual mechanism by which it affects us. If we're talking about this organizational principle affecting our physical body, well, there has to be an actual mechanism which allows it to effectuate those results. So what happens is, we have these 7 points of interface, and they are like reservoirs of energy which allow us to connect with the souls in 7 different ways, which give us 7 different identities and give us 7 different modes of perception. Right? And 7 different inclinations. We have inclinations which involve self-preservation, self-gratification, self-definition, self-acceptance, self-expression, self-reflection, and self-knowledge. Each one of these has to be kept in balance and has to be engaged on a regular basis, or else the parts of the soul start to atrophy. Right? So now, what happens is, in order for those 7 points to actually integrate themselves with the rest of the body, right? You have 7 attributes, 7 reservoirs of energy connecting by means of the meridian system to and networking with 5 different levels, 5 different layers of meridians to every last body tissue. Meaning that if you look at the different meridian systems, they are actually integrated, set up according to 5 different layers. You have the neural system, you have the superficial system, you have the internal system, never mind the names. You have a system that runs under the skin, you have a system of meridians that runs along the nerves, inside the blood vessels, around the blood vessels, and inside the internal organs. Right? And these are all interconnected, and they actually terminate in the cell nuclei. If you want to read more about this, I suggest you get the book Vibrational Medicine by Richard Gerber. He's actually an MD, and he goes into the double-blind studies and the other scientific evidence that actually exists to help piece this worldview together of a system of meridians and chakras and what have you. But the main concept here is that if energy in the chakra is blocked, then energy in the meridians will be blocked. And if energy in the meridians is blocked, then this vital energy, which carries the organizational principle, which carries the negatively entropic energy, which is moving towards order instead of disorder, that energy flow will be interrupted, and the body will no longer be invited back to a state of organization. Alright? You see how there's like an outreach program there from the... So we talked about the causal body, we talked about, very briefly albeit, the different things that are involved in keeping your causal body healthy. We talked about akhlaq, well-functioning intellect and what have you, meaning the correct worldview and the correct ideology, both hand in hand, contribute to the causal body. Then we were talking about the mental body, the astral body, the etheric body, and now we're talking about how that etheric body actually connects with the physical body. By means of the chakras, by means of the meridian system, we have an etheric network of energy running through the body, terminating in the cell nuclei, which is where the DNA is being kept, and meaning that our thoughts at the highest level are connected to the DNA. Right? It is a progressively sort of, this system progresses into the very, even the most minute and the smallest expressions of the physical self, right? In the DNA, which possesses the coding for the physical attributes. And there's a connection there between that physical coding, that genetic coding, and your moment, your thoughts on a moment-to-moment basis, right? So, if you're able to purify a part of yourself, if you are able to, let's say, rid yourself of a certain habit, a certain emotional tendency, a certain disharmonious emotion, that's going to affect you every level of your being, all the way down to the DNA. Right? You see how that's actually happening when we say that, oh, well, your character is going to affect you, it's going to bring about disease if you fail to address certain issues. Well, there's a connection there. It's not just, well, God figures it out somehow. Well, yeah, He figures it out somehow, but there is a logical flow of events that is actually bringing that about, right? And you see how really what we're talking about in the case of a cancer or a case of some kind of chronic disease, or especially autoimmune diseases, right? Why do we have autoimmune diseases? It's a type of self-loathing, right? Which is actually the definition of hell. Is you are disgusted with yourself in hell. You're judging yourself. You know you could have made more of your time on earth. You didn't make good use of that, and so you loathe yourself in the hereafter. It's not that God is there, He's prepared the fires of hell and He's waiting to chuck you in it. That's a very primitive method of explaining things that was used for the Arabs who Imam Ali used to say, he used to go and talk to the well because he didn't have anyone else to talk to. Would he explain metaphysics to people? And you have people that still want to be explained things now as Imam Ali explained them then. That's not to say his explanations are out of date, but it's to say that Imam Ali the literal examples that he gave then were very basic because the people he was talking to were very basic. Right? When he said, ask me anything, what did they answer? How many hairs are on my head? These are the intellectuals of the day. Right? He didn't have anyone to answer. He wanted to give people things to think about, but what was the brain? That was as big as the brain got to think about. How many hairs are on my head? Right? And this is one thing I just like to put in parentheses here. It's something sometimes I actually ask people to actually state the question, but in the past it's been a tricky situation with this sometimes, but I'll put it out as a rhetorical question. If Imam Zaman were to come and sit down right now in front of you, what's the most intelligent question you could ask him right now? Obviously there's got to be a difference between when Imam Zaman is here and when he's not here. We have some abstract idea when Imam Zaman comes, this and that is going to happen, that's great, we look at certain benefits that are going to be conferred to us, meaning that, Imam Zaman's going to come, there's going to be justice, God, He's going to take it away, He's going to take Coca-Cola away from the Jews, He's going to give it to us. It's like there's some kind of shift in the balance of the physical world that's going to somehow end in our favor, right? But put that all aside. What if Imam Ali was sitting right in front of you right now? That affects essentially, whatever Imam Ali knew, Imam Zaman knows. And now imagine you're sitting in the audience, Imam Zaman turns to you and says, ask me anything. Right? Are we the kind of people that are going to send him off to the well to talk because he's got no intelligent conversation amongst us? Like if I were to ask that question right now, would all of you be able to give me an example, or give me your prime example of the most intelligent question that you can ask someone of Imam Zaman's caliber? And why don't you ask it if you want to, and we'll see, I can perhaps see if that question has already been answered somewhere in Hadith already. Do any of you have any questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
How can we defeat the Jews?
Let's start by boycotting them. Start by not supporting them. We haven't even gotten close to defeating them yet. We're still supporting them, Muslims. We still drink Coca-Cola. We still buy computers with Intel processors in them. You know? We still eat at McDonald's when it's convenient for us. You know? We love Imam Zaman as long as it's convenient. As long as there's a closer restaurant to us. But if McDonald's is there, we'll go and give the money to the Zionists. You know, so never mind that question. We got a long way before we start defeating Jews.
When he comes or ask about the whole story about Karbala.
You want to know about a historical event?
No, whole story about Karbala. What happened on that day?
A historical event. That's what I said. Yeah, you want to ask about a historical event. Okay. Would anyone have a question that doesn't have to do with the historical event? It has something to do with your relationship with Allah.
Well, on a more micro scale, obviously, within where we are at the moment, if Imam Zaman came. The question I would ask is, what is the Siratul Mustaqim? I mean, what is the middle way?
Right.
I mean, that obviously dependent on how you answer the question regarding myself, because obviously the Imam spoke to people on their level, and very specifically to the person, whoever was asking the question, because obviously it was an antidote to any problem which they had. So
right.
that's the question I would ask. But I wouldn't say it's intelligent, it's just relative, isn't it?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, if it's intelligent insofar as that is the most useful question for you.
Yes.
That is the question that will help you put things in perspective in a way that that will generate the most expedient outcome for you. So that's the most intelligent question anyone can ask, right? Is the one that will allow them to do what the Prophet wants them to do. And that's to ennoble their character.
Can I ask one more question?
I just want to finish answering his question. Yeah, and that is, in order to achieve the Sirat al-Mustaqim, right, we have certain indicators. Obviously, this goes without saying, but caliber answer you get from the Imam. But I'm just saying that what we know of it indicates that the Sirat al-Mustaqim is the path that puts everything in its right perspective. You see, it's the middle path. It's a path of moderation. It's a path that puts everything in balance. When you put everything in its right perspective, then everything will be in balance. If a thing is in its right perspective, if an attribute of yours is in its right perspective, then there can be no excesses, there can be no deficiencies, right? So it's really all about finding your life path, what talents are specific to performing the task that Allah has chosen for you, right? And then, I know you'd be asking for a personalized question, but like as a healer, those are the kind of questions that I help people find the answers to. Meaning that by using Reiki energy and by putting all those nutrients in your body, it becomes clear. Allah can communicate these things to you so they become manifest. Imam Zaman surely will answer these kind of things, even if it's in a form of an inspiration where he doesn't formally come and introduce himself in the physical realm. He will make those answers available to you. As soon as we start following those things that the knowledge that we do have available to us here, when we start applying everything that we know, everything else starts falling into place. Right? And when all of those subtle bodies are in sync, are all aligned, then that's when you're on the Sirat al-Mustaqim, because that is when everything flows well. When you're a dynamic person, you can adjust to every situation. Right? I mean, there was no such thing as an awkward moment for any of the Ma'sumin. There was never a situation where don't know what to say here, I feel kind of awkward. You know, the Imams always knew how to adapt to any situation. Right? And that requires a certain flexibility in the application of variables in the right perspective. So really we're talking about several ingredients of the self that ultimately allow you to be a free-flowing vessel that expresses those attributes always in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, it's fine. That's an excellent answer. But in regards to obviously the people who were around at the time with Imam Ali and Islam, there were individuals who understood on a philosophical level. But even today, would you say, I mean, according to Al-Farabi, for example, when we're talking about the Prophet ﷺ, he was obviously the age of intellect, for example, at one point. And he had concepts of when the Quran was revealed for the masses, in terms it was a lot of poetics and imagination within the Quran to make it more palatable for everyone. Then the reason why it was introduced in such a way is because people, not all people, not the masses, can think on an intellectual level. And even like Ibn Sina or the other philosophers, they would state that themselves even, to say that philosophy is the higher level. Sorry.
Doesn't that relate to what he's saying?
It,
That when you have the balance, then the aql is expressed in the correct form. And those, we have it, you just have to have things organised for its expression. So somebody isn't, you're not unable to comprehend, you just haven't got the balance at that time. If that's, is that what you mean?
Sorry, could you say the last part of what you were saying?
Yeah, it's in regards to, I don't know, we're living in 2012, for example.
Yeah.
Our knowledge has expanded, makes more in the scientific world, even in other fields.
Right.
We understand concepts much faster, essentially because we have more information available to us. But even if you go back in time, the people around Imam Ali alayhi salam, if he answered, there were people, he would have spoken to them on their own level. I'm just trying to kind of figure my way out whilst I'm talking. So, if the Imam alayhi salam was present here, then he would speak to everyone very individually. The concepts, I mean, the talk which you're doing is absolutely amazing and it's fantastic because you mentioned different philosophical concepts, and definitely that's where I believe we kind of have to be heading.
Right.
But then, when we're talking about Siratul Mustaqim, I always think of things on a much more micro level. As long as we're working on the micro level, then the macro will take care of itself, as you kind of explained.
I actually see the other way around. When we're functioning according to the right concepts, then those concepts organize the micro level. You see, look at the flow that Allah has put in effect here. It's the macro level organizing the micro level, right? What the physical body, that's the micro level. That's subservient to the higher levels. And it goes all the way up to the causal body, where it's the intellect, the correct worldview will organize the correct personality or the emotional self, which will organize the physical self, etc., right? So you see how like the flow comes from the top down, right? It's the same thing when it comes to concepts. That if I have a concept that, let's say, as an example, I deal in universal laws. That like there's a certain universal law. We talk about metaphysics in Islamic metaphysics. We talk about كل شيء إذا جاوز حده انعكس ضده, or انعكس إلى ضده, which means all things, when they transgress their limits, they exhibit their opposites. Right? So you start laughing. You start laughing harder. You start laughing so hard it sounds like you're crying. In fact, you start tearing. You start crying. You start crying so hard it actually sounds like you're laughing. Right? And this is a very primitive example I'm giving you. That like these are cycles that we. Right? Now this is a law. Now apply it to any given situation. Or the other one, اجتماع النقيضين محال. You talk about the combination of contradictions is impossible. A thing cannot be and not be at the same time. That's the concept. That's the macro level. Now apply it to the micro level. Anything you put your finger on at the micro level, that law applies to. Right? So he said, when you got that stuff figured out, then you can interpret what's going on at the micro level perfectly. Because you've got access to the laws that dictate the behavior at the micro level. So, did you want to apply that to what you were saying?
That's fine. I just had another kind of concept floating in my head whilst you were explaining something.
Oh, okay.
I can't remember who it was. It was the later century philosopher. It was I think it was Mullah Sadra. We talk about the concept of Inna Allah Raji'un. So we come from Allah and we are perpetually returning to Allah.
Yeah.
So in that sort of concept, yes, we have come from the source. But as we're perpetually returning to Allah, we're still in the physical realm, but we're still developing upwards, like a plant kind of grows upwards.
Yeah.
So I understand the concept is fine, but on the macro level, on the micro level, it's a relationship, isn't it? I mean, you can have the concept, the concept can be there, but we're in the physical realm. So on the micro level, the issues that we have every day, for example, every day, within every hour.
Yeah.
How do we prioritize those? If we're talking about Salatul Mustaqim and the balance within the life you're supposed to have, especially living the life that we lead now in London, there could be have a Bahraini protest going on over there, but there's a Malad over here, and it's probably Zohar time. I mean, how do you prioritize those? I understand you have to reach that concept, but you kind of have to grow from the micro to the macro.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of complete that circle within the low and the larger, that thing. So
right.
What you're saying is completely right.
Yeah.
But I'm just kind of adding
putting it in perspective, yeah.
Yeah, in a way.
Yeah, you're talking about the Nafas Rahmani. They call Mullah Sadra and the Urafa refer to this the Qaws Nuzul and the Qaws Su'ud. So you are descending from that point of origin, you're moving from transcendence to immanence, and you have to return from immanence to transcendence. And this is that when we come full circle, because we have the soul developing alongside the body during the developmental process of the fetus, and then eventually, as the body reaches fruition, then it is the soul becomes grounded by the body, meaning that, and this is actually what I wanted to get into, so it's a perfect question, because in order to establish the correct biochemical environment in the blood, so that the soul can actually establish a strong connection with the body, certain nutrients, certain neurotransmitters, certain compounds have to be present in the bloodstream. And this is what we have, is why is it possible for a soul to even connect to the body so that we can have this close nuzul, meaning the soul is moving into the physical realm, is developing from something, it's coming from one point of origin, a metaphysical point of origin, and is developing alongside something physical so that you have a human being emerging with metaphysical capacities and physical capacities. You see a magnet, right? Now think about this. If we were to put a really powerful electromagnet, let's say, in this wall, and to turn that on, it's possible that electromagnet will be able to pull you against it. Why? Because you have blood, and in your blood there's hemoglobin, and in your hemoglobin there's iron, right? And iron responds to magnetism. That's why magnetic therapy is oftentimes useful in order to attract blood cells to a part, in order to expedite the healing process. Nonetheless, if you were to increase your iron levels in your body, right, it is theoretically possible, once they reach a certain level, that a magnet will be able to affect you, right? Now, imagine that your soul is that magnet, and it wants to affect your physical body. You have certain electrolytes in your body, right? They're crucial to nervous function, right? Meaning, without calcium and magnesium, there are many neurotransmitters that cannot actually effectuate different responses in the body unless they go through the right calcium channels, they go through the right magnesium channels. You have the sodium-potassium pump, another two electrolytes, which are crucial to the nerve impulse, right? Meaning that you cannot have an electrical signal sent from the axon along the dendrites in order to communicate with other nerves unless you actually have an exchange of potassium and sodium within the interstitial fluid and within the nerve itself. Meaning that these different minerals, these different metals, insofar as we have the right and balanced amounts of those, are we able to actually produce nervous activity in our bodies, right? And what is that indicating? Nervous activity, thoughts, where are they coming from, these thoughts? They're coming from higher faculties which belong to subtle bodies. Right? So you see the magnetism, that pull, that effect, that compulsion and repulsion that exists between the soul, the metaphysical aspect, and the physical aspect of the self, very much relies on the biochemical content of your bloodstream. Meaning, if certain minerals are not present, life cannot exist. If you remove all the iron from your body, right, you'll die. It's as simple as that. You don't have blood cells, you cannot transport oxygen, you can't transport... What happens when you stop breathing? No oxygen, you die. Right? So if there isn't an efficient oxygenation of tissues, you have cells dying. Right? You have necrosis, you have different levels of tissue breakdown, and then you have different levels of disease. Right? So if you alter the balance of electrolytes, you alter the balance of minerals, all these different trace minerals that are there, magnesium, zinc, vanadium, you name it. You change the balance of minerals, then you change the relationship between the physical and the metaphysical, right? Because that polarity is being altered. Now, this is what I wanted to take it actually back to, is these levels of neurotransmitters, of which I've found in my own practice now, in the 12 years that I've been a nutritionist, when I have altered people's dopamine levels, it has been the most telling, significant factor in their satisfaction with life. And when your dopamine levels are higher, it changes so much about how you feel, how focused a person you are, right? In order to achieve that, because dopamine, what really is implicit there, and there is every reason to believe this. Now consider, in Arabic, when we talk about insanity, in Arabic, what's the word for an insane person? Majnoon, right? What's the word for the genus of beings that live in the astral realm, are of a fiery nature, and like to antagonize us? Jinn. Right? How many noons are in jinn? 2. Right? If you apply the template of maf'ul to the template of jinn, the three family complex of the letters in the word of jinn, what do you get? Ilm becomes ma'aloom, jahl becomes majhul, jinn becomes majnoon, right? So what we're talking about, insanity then, from the perspective, the vocabulary that our prophets and imam use, we're talking about, when we're talking about somebody who's challenged, we're actually talking about jinn influencing that person. What is one of the symptoms of schizophrenia?
People talking to themselves.
People hear voices, right? People hear voices and they're like...
It's a very broad disease.
I didn't say
it's
the
a
full...
very broad disease. Huh? It's almost even a syndrome as opposed to a disease.
Yeah, but all I asked for was one of the common symptoms of schizophrenia. It was a simple question, and that is people hear voices. Yeah, there are 50 other things, but that's not the context of our discussion.
It's not a common symptom. Let me make that clear. Not a common symptom.
I've seen 4 patients so far with schizophrenia, and all of them reported the
same thing.
There are
hundreds of thousands. Not a common symptom.
Okay, so the intelligent option is just to really take the point and move on. Okay? I'm not getting into medical discussion here. If we were, we would declare it and have come under those pretenses, but that's not what this is about. Many people who suffer from schizophrenia then hear voices. Okay, now, hearing voices, where are those voices coming from? LSD, what is the mechanism by which LSD elicits its hallucinations? Can anyone tell me? No one with a background in this? LSD removes the serotonin from your bloodstream. Right? Serotonin is converted to melatonin, which produces the conditions necessary to fall asleep. Right? Now, what if you could replicate the conditions necessary to dream, i.e. the removal of serotonin from the bloodstream, without replicating the conditions necessary to fall asleep? That's LSD. Now, what LSD does is actually removes one of the veils between the physical and the astral realm. People on LSD, one of the things that freaks people out on LSD is the things that they see seem to have a relationship with reality. They know they've taken a hallucinogenic, right? A hallucinogenic substance, but they don't, somehow what they're seeing is in a context that actually frightens them. Right? One of the golden rules of LSD use is never look at yourself in the mirror. Right? Is because you end up seeing part of yourself, an astral realm, meaning the barzakhi state of affairs that defines your soul in the mirror, and it puts a lot of people off. Right? Now, you can, I suggest if you're interested in reading up on this, there is Psychedelic Drugs Reconsidered, PDR, by Grinspoon and Bacala. It's a very interesting book where they actually go into the different, they've tested these things on spiders and collected different reports, anecdotal evidence and case studies from people who've taken these things. Military has done all kinds of research on it. And one common theme that you see is that there is some kind of connection between the hallucinations and reality. They're not disparate realities. Right? People oftentimes say they see the nature of a person. Like they look at a stingy person, they see a rat or a mouse. They look at let's say, a very lustful person, they'll see a dog. Right? Things like that. Right? And these are things that we've had described by our imams, meaning that barzakhi self tends to represent your true nature. So what's possible here is that we've actually been given an insight into the physical realm, right? The metaphysical realm, the astral realm. That it's like we are, just as when we dream, we move into the astral realm, we have experiences there, people have out-of-body experiences, they have experiences there. Right? Why is it that there is some kind of correspondence between reality and these hallucinations? Because they're not actually hallucinations. Not all of them, anyway. The majority of them. Now, I am a person who's actually experimented with LSD in my teenage years, and I can state for one that the things that I saw under the influence of LSD, they really did freak me out, because they truly did reflect the nature of the things that I saw. And when I was talking about stingy people and lustful people, I'm talking about actually my experience with my friends on LSD. It's something I didn't understand at the time, but later, studying Islamic metaphysics helped shed light on the matter. So what I'm saying is that, you see, this balance of neurotransmitters is actually affecting your perception of reality. Meaning that your connection with these different subtle bodies is being affected and modulated by the balance of neurotransmitters in your bloodstream. If you take the serotonin out, you can see the astral realm, right? And we're not talking about turning something on like as clear as night and day and what have you. We're talking about a blurry border between what we normally perceive as physical reality, now extending into metaphysical reality, right? So obviously, I'm not in any way advocating you take LSD and then you get RF vision or anything like that. It's just, we're talking about how our experience of astral reality. Talk to me after.
Blue or green?
Don't eat the brown acid. Basically, if you look at the balance of neurotransmitters and you look at the relationship that has with different mental disorders, we see that there is quite a significant relationship there, right? Such that in schizophrenia, like we said before, we see an imbalance of dopamine, too little in the mesocortical, too much in the mesolimbic pathway, right? We see people with obsessive compulsive disorders. We see something very similar. Right? What we're talking about is a failure of the astral bodies or the causal bodies or these different parts of ourselves to connect effectively to one another and then to the physical body. Such that if you alter the balance of neurotransmitters at the physical level, right? My own experience and your experience can show you the same. Why is it that you start feeling better? Why is it that it improves your memory? Why is it that you're able to effortlessly remember the things that are of use to you at the time? When you start taking things, now if you go to a doctor and you say, I'm depressed, right? One of the first things most doctors will do is prescribe you an SSRI, right? Now, instead of encouraging the body to produce the neurotransmitters Allah has taught the body to produce neurotransmitters. Instead of making sure, first and foremost, that the body has everything it needs to produce those neurotransmitters, they say, well, you have compromised production, so we'll just make everything we'll stop the body from naturally reabsorbing those. Well, there are so many other methods, right? And let me just briefly touch on them. We have a certain enzyme in our body called monoamine oxidase, right? Monoamine oxidase is an inhibitor, meaning it metabolizes certain catecholamine neurotransmitters, such as serotonin, dopamine, phenethylamine, adrenaline, noradrenaline, etc. All of these things are affecting your mood in some way or another. Phenethylamine is the love drug, right? Ecstasy is a substrate for it. When you fall in love, you feel it. It fills you with good energy, good vibes, satisfaction with life. People who fill out surveys when they're in love, they oftentimes report much greater life satisfaction than people who are not in love, right? And it's understandable. Phenethylamine also triggers dopamine release. So these things are very much connected here. Now, if you could reduce the activity of an enzyme that is wasting away these neurotransmitters, you would be, in effect, extending the shelf life of these neurotransmitters in your bloodstream. Meaning if you could inhibit monoamine oxidase, you would be inhibiting that which is metabolizing all these feel-good hormones in your body. Now, there are unnatural ways of doing that, but Allah has also given signs. If you look at, what are the things that we oftentimes associate with good vibes, right? We know certain cultures in this world like colors more than others, and we also know that some of those cultures are also associated with a sort of more Epicurean and a sort of a lighter way of living. Right? If you look at Caribbean culture, right, they're happy people, right? And what is the...
Are they? No, I don't know. They're not happy at all. They need to
Is it only when they're smoking marijuana?
No.
Well, they surely come off as happy people.
The caricature you were talking about earlier.
Just taking one attribute and defining it. It's not what I'm trying to say, but they tend to be, I don't know, cheerful people at the very least. Maybe not content with their lives or whatever you, but... Okay, let's just skip all that. I failed miserably on that one. And just go to the colors, right? Allah has made certain food more colorful than other food, right? Rice isn't that colorful, right? Especially brown rice, not too exciting, right? But if you look at fruit, right, we have orange fruit, we have yellow fruit, we have red fruit, purple fruit, indigo fruit, blue fruit, all kinds of different colors of fruit. Now what's interesting is it is the very substances which give fruit their color, right? It is the beta-carotene that makes carrots and sweet potatoes orange, right? It's the lycopene that puts the red in the tomatoes. It is the indigo in, let's say, black currants, right? That gives them the proanthocyanidins and the procyanins. All these different antioxidants, which function also as monoamine oxidase inhibitors, are the ones that put the color in meaning put the happy vibes in the fruit. You see, this is what's referred to in herbology as a doctrine of signatures. Is when you look at an organism and you recognize the qualities of that organism by its physical appearance or some other physical sign in its growth pattern, or the cluster of seeds that are there, within different parts of the plant or what have you. Right, so we see a certain message there, right? And as it turns out, there are certain neurotransmitters which are very effective at prolonging the shelf life of the neurotransmitters that make you feel good, right? So most notably, we're talking about quercetin, right, which is abundant in citrus fruit, for instance, in onions and what have you, specifically red onions more than the white onions. So it was about color, you see. We're also talking about vitamin C, which is a necessary cofactor in the production of the conversion of phenylalanine into tyrosine, into L-dopa, and into dopamine. We're talking about proanthocyanidins, anthocyanins, epicatechin, catechin, the polyphenols, right? Epigallocatechin gallase. These are all these neurotransmitters that, in some way, these antioxidants, which contribute to prolonging to potentiating the effects of these feel-good hormones. Meaning, as an example, bioflavonoids such as quercetin. If you ingest ascorbic acid, as we were talking about before, you ingest vitamin C, 60 milligrams of vitamin C will act like 600 milligrams of vitamin C if you have the right amount of bioflavonoids being ingested with the vitamin C. Meaning Allah has put Allah always formulates things in the perfect way. You eat an orange is much more useful. Having an orange with 60 milligrams of vitamin C in it is much more useful than consuming orange, let's say a vitamin pill with 300 milligrams of ascorbic acid. Because Allah prolongs the life. He's put all kinds of other compounds in there. Bergamotin, narginin, all these other compounds that are there to prolong the life and increase the effects of these other nutrients that are in the citrus fruits. So basically, when you're looking at nourishing yourself, it is most advisable to seek those formulations of nutritional spectrum, nutritional profiles that Allah has actually designed Himself. Right? Meaning, if you want to, rather than taking a vitamin pill with very low absorption rates, we were talking about before that things like ferrous fumarate, ferrous sulfate have absorption rates of 0.9% when you eat them with food. Most people take their vitamins with food. The absorption of many minerals actually depends on food. They need the chelating agents to actually transport it, into the intestine, into the bloodstream, and actually so they can actually be taken up and used. And bioavailability very much depends on that chelation. So here we have 20% of maximum, 20% of calcium being used. About 25% of zinc being absorbed under certain circumstances. These are very low absorption rates because what we're dealing with when you're taking vitamin pills are synthetic vitamins. Right? When Allah formulates things, He attaches them, like in the case of spirulina, which I'm a big advocate of myself, He attaches these vitamins, a full spectrum selection of vitamins and minerals and trace minerals. He attaches them to a pre-digested form of protein and amino acids known as bilirubin, which means that, which is also connected to probiotic factors within the spirulina. Now the probiotic factors will encourage the proliferation of Lactobacillus acidophilus, which is necessary for the proper absorption of minerals and vitamins. Right? If you have too much candida, which is it's a very likely possibility if you have a deficiency of Lactobacillus acidophilus, then you have the proliferation of this yeast which releases acids into the bloodstream. It weakens your memory. It causes wreaks all kinds of havoc on the acidity, the pH environment of your blood, which compromises your blood oxygen levels, which compromises all kinds of things which oxygen depends on. Right? Remember, oxygen is killing the virus, killing the bacteria, killing the parasite, killing the cancer. Right? So we want the oxygen levels, so we want to reduce acidity. So we have to look at what ways of living can actually promote higher alkaline levels of alkalinity. Now it's interesting to note that these emotions and these attributes that Allah has warned us about actually provoke acidic reactions in the body. Envy, greed, feelings of stinginess, meaning possessiveness over things, anger, jealousy, these kind of things, they all increase blood acidity, which are going to compromise oxygen levels, which are going to deprive you of that state of tranquility, that state of calmness, which is going to sort of promote the better, wiser decisions that Allah is asking from you. Right? You see the relationship? Things are described as ethical in the Islamic ethical system insofar as they promote a state of tranquility so that you can make the better decisions, so that you can have the more efficacious mentality. So your mental tranquility, your mental collectiveness, right, very much relies on blood alkalinity, which relies on avoiding those emotions, right, which can also be, the effects of that alkalinity and the reduction of the acidity can be affected by your diet. So this is where I'm bringing the discussion full circle finally. I didn't keep well my promise to keep it very succinct, did I now? But thank you very much for being patient. I do appreciate and recognize the fact that it takes a lot more energy to focus than it does to actually talk. So I fully respect that of you, that you were all very respectful and very patient, and those of you that were here for the entire discussion and maintained eye contact and at least pretended that you were listening. I'm sure you were. I very much appreciate it, because I do recognize how difficult it is. I probably couldn't sit there and listen to my monotonous voice for as long as you did, so may Allah bless all of you for that. But to bring it full circle, so it's actually something you can walk away with, because I always feel if you can't walk away with something at the end of a speech, I wasted your time. So what I would very much recommend is that you pursue, not only take certain steps to correct your diet, to integrate these nutrients into your body so that you are promoting higher blood alkalinity. It's a very important thing. Getting more of those antioxidants and getting very bioavailable sources of protein so that you are expediting and guaranteeing that the body can actually produce those neurotransmitters. The dopamine, the serotonin, all of these neurotransmitters, and we can argue about what does what, but really at the end of the day, try it and you'll see the effects. When you balance your dopamine, several individuals in the room here can testify to the effects of using the supplements that I have been promoting, because these particular combinations I find, because they are the richest sources of these antioxidants, notably acai berry, you're going to get the higher catecholamine levels, and you're going to see improvements in your memory, you're going to see improvements in your mood stability, you're not going to be fluctuating. The alkalinity of your bloodstream is going to promote more stable blood sugar levels, and all of these are going to affect your akhlaq in some way or another. What I'm saying is, if there's a way to improve your akhlaq by improving your diet, that is the simplest tool that you have available to you. To struggle with blood acidity, to struggle with low oxygen levels, to struggle with compromised nutrition, and try and control your anger, and try and keep your mood stable, and do all these things which are obviously very difficult. People go for counseling for years and they still come out, with less than adequate self-control abilities, right? So obviously it's something as a species we struggle with. So if there are variables that are in your control, if Allah has given you certain tools by means of which you can increase these feelings of well-being, promote more stability in your personality, reduce the fluctuations in your biorhythm so that you're not jumping up and down 1 minute and screaming at your family the next. Right? If you can stabilize your personality and your character just by consuming certain supplements or changing your diet in a certain way, then why not? Right? Is it not at least worth giving a try?
One question, sir.
Yeah.
Well, I'm taking something about 10 or 12 tablets every day. For this and for that,
Yeah.
for that, and all.
Yeah.
I mean, I beg them to reduce, but they add one more.
Right. That's the vicious cycle.
Could you please take this? If you don't take it, you will go away.
Uh-huh.
And then I said, well, of course, they're terrifying, but I don't take it for a few days, then take it again.
Right.
So I've got too much toxin in my blood.
Right.
How to get rid of it?
Okay. I'll talk to you about this right after, inshallah. We'll discuss this. Yeah, there's the method that I generally
That will take another
advise
4
is-
hours.
Another 4 hours, can't help you. First, remove the toxins using the methods that have been prescribed by our imams, right? Using bloodletting techniques, the most effective of which is leeches. And then we put in the nutrition to encourage the completion of the detoxification process. But I'll discuss the details with you later. So anyway, do you see the organic logic in this process? Do you see how everything is interconnected? Do you see how this isn't something that is far removed from the tools that we all have access to, right? This isn't a method that requires, we're waiting on the world's leading scientists to split the atom and discover something that's going to cure everything. Do you see how we don't need electricity to do any of this? Do you see how we're not relying on some kind of method above and beyond just healthy nutrition and reflective living in order to improve our health and improve our value, our quality of life? Right? Now, do you see why we have hadith that say that if mankind were to perfect their intellect, then the world would disintegrate, the dunyawi structures that we set up for ourselves would fall apart? Right? Because freedom of the self is all about freeing yourself of all the conditions on your contentment that are beyond your locus of control. The minute your happiness is dependent on something that you can't control, you're no longer free. And as a human being, you're only free insofar as you can release yourself from those things and only occupy your thoughts with things that are of real, true value. And every second wasted is a second that you're going to regret, and it is a second that you're going to loathe yourself for when you move into the next realm. And that is a definition of hell. Right? So with that, I'll just leave you to it.
Thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
What about,
questions? Yeah.
I've spoken to a few brothers and, seasonal fruits. How does this fit in with maybe the diet that we have? Because, you can
go wash my face.
Yeah.
I'm a bit uncomfortable. So wash the...
Yeah, I think that's the point, it's supposed to be eating things in season, but you're right, we're supposed to be eating things in season, but
because if you go, say you're going to the supermarket, right? You got bananas there all year round.
Yeah.
Most of the fruits are there all year round. There's no absence of anything.
Many times.
That fish as well.
So there has to be
we have complete discussion.
some balance.
Why, what do you do, sister?
Huh?
What
And we don't know what's in season, do we?
No.
What do I do?
No.
I'm a
websites that tell you what
But I
seasons
do
to do
massage and
Usually berries.
That's why you should
but
have
here
this.
I want to ask